Hi, everybody. Tonight, let us drift softly into the folds of time, wandering back to an age when flickering rushlights pushed back the darkness only so far, and life was as brittle and cold as a late autumn frost. In this gentle telling, I shall carry you through the hidden shadows of the medieval world, into the corners where life grew harsh, where the land itself seemed to conspire with misery, and where hope was as thin as the smoke curling from a poor man's hearth. These are the worst places to live in medieval times, places whose very names slip from the tongue like a sigh, forgotten by the noble and feared by the wise. Tonight, we begin our long, winding tale in a place the maps hardly marked, where the land lies wet and the air always carries a hint of rot. Here, in the low belly of England's eastern reaches, sprawls Fenmere, an unassuming hamlet smothered by endless marsh. No proud stone church steeple pierces the sky here. No cobbled road runs through its heart. Instead, a labyrinth of muddy tracks weaves between trembling pools and reed-choked channels, each path more treacherous than the last. The people of Fenmere build their homes upon lumps of peat and woven reed, perched above sodden earth that slurps at their steps. The huts stand squat and damp, walls of wattle and daub weeping moisture in the constant mist. Even the hearth fires burn reluctantly, hissing as damp wood smolders. In this place, the villagers wake before the sun struggles through the clinging fog. Their days begin with the chill bite of water around their ankles. Fathers wade waist-deep through stagnant channels to tend eel traps and gather reeds for thatch and basketry. Mothers stoop in watery fields, clawing at stubborn roots hidden in the muck. Children wander barefoot on spongy ground, skin raw from the wet, eyes wide and hollow, from nights spent listening to the wind hiss through the rushes. Winter is the true ruler here. Though summer brings a fleeting warmth, it cannot dry the bogs nor banish the fevers that lurk in the standing pools. The damp never releases its grip. Clothes and blankets hang heavy with it, and bodies shiver beneath layers of rough-spun wool. Fevers rise with the fog. A cough that begins as a whisper grows fierce in the chest until it claims the old and the young alike. In Fenmere, death is no stranger. It drifts through the village like the morning mist, pale and patient. Yet, in this sodden despair, a fragile beauty clings. At dawn, the marshes glow under a thin wash of silver light. Water mirrors the first pale rays of day, broken only by the silent gliding of a lone boat, its oars muffled in the hush. Egrets stand tall and still, their thin legs hidden among the reeds. It is a place that hums with life, even as it feeds on those who dwell within it. Frogs croak in hidden pools, insects buzz in drifts of mist, and the rustle of reeds offers a lullaby that only the fens can sing. Still, no softness of dawn can sweeten the cruelty of life here. Once each year, the steward of the distant lord appears on horseback, boots muddied before he reaches the first hut. His arrival is a dread event, one that stirs fear deeper than the chill. He counts bundles of reeds, bushels of peat, baskets of eels and fish, all tallied against rents owed by families who have little to give. If the offerings fall short, the fines are cruel. A pig taken, or the family's eldest son pressed into forced labor, trudging far from home to toil on dry lands he may never see again. The villagers bear it in silence. They have no walls to defend them, no swords to raise. Their protests drown in the bogs as easily as careless feet. They have learned to survive in small ways, patching leaks with handfuls of rush, lining boots with straw, sharing thin pottage when hunger gnaws worst. They warm each other with stories whispered by the hearth, tales of dry hills and wide fields where grain grows tall and barns are never empty. Some say such places exist, though few in Fenmere have ever seen them. The marsh keeps its folk, binding them with its watery chains. Sometimes, a wandering friar comes poling his way through the channels, his voice echoing beneath the cloister of reeds. He brings words of penance and promises of salvation, but also stories of distant wonders. Grand cathedrals where candles burn brighter than stars, bustling market towns where coins clink like rain on a stone roof. The children listen with eyes round as full moons, yet even they know the stories belong to another world. A world where feet are dry and the land does not swallow a man whole if he strays too far from the path. Still, hope flickers like a rushlight guttering in the draft. Some dream of running, of following the friar's path, or drifting down the channels until the marsh surrenders them to open fields. But the fens are jealous. Many who leave return broken, their pockets empty, their eyes hollowed deeper than before. And always the bog waits, soft, silent, swallowing secrets and bones alike. Tonight, as you lie drifting between waking and sleep, hear the distant drip of water, the soft whisper of the reeds brushing one another in the dusk. Feel the cold that curls around thin walls, the ache of damp that settles deep in bone and soul. But listen too for the faint heartbeat of life within Fenmare, a mother's hush, a child's sigh, the crackle of a stubborn hearth that glows despite the damp. For in these shadows, even in the worst corners of the medieval world, warmth can sometimes be found, not in stone walls or noble halls, but in the simple courage of people who stand, year after year, knee-deep in the mud, and dare to dream of dry ground beneath their feet. And so we linger here for tonight. When next we meet, our little boat will push deeper into the fens, where darker waters wait, and the mist hides stories even colder than the bog beneath our feet. Let the reeds sway and the frogs croak, let the wind hum you into a soft, drifting sleep. The fens will keep their secrets until dawn comes once more. When next we meet, the dawn is already stretching her pale fingers over the waterlogged land, brushing silver light across the dark mirror of the marsh. A lone punt drifts along a narrow channel, its hull slipping soundlessly between stands of sedge and knotty roots. Here, the path grows narrower, the way more secretive. The people of Fenmare know these twisting veins well enough to navigate by instinct alone, for no map can mark every hidden bend and suck of mud that waits beneath the shallows. Our journey now leaves the clustered huts behind, moving toward the outer reaches of the fen, where few live, and fewer still linger after sunset. There, the mists grow thicker, the ground softer underfoot until earth and water become one shifting skin. It is in these borderlands that the marsh wardens dwell, ragged men and women who keep watch for poachers, stray cattle, and sometimes darker things that slip unseen through the reeds. The wardens' huts are smaller than the village dwellings, little more than hovels perched upon woven reed mats and timber piles driven deep into the bog. A single crooked path of planks connects their shelters, but many stretches vanish underwater when the rains come heavy and the rivers swell. To live here is to accept that the land may change shape overnight. A channel that was passable yesterday might swallow a careless foot today. It is no wonder that few seek out this watery solitude unless they must. Yet solitude has its price. The wardens are not paid in coin but in privilege. Freedom to hunt waterfowl for their own pot, to gather leeches to sell to the apothecaries in distant towns. Some say they are outcasts, folk who fled debts or feuds, finding in the fen's endless maze a kind of rough sanctuary. If the Lord's men must pass through this far, they do so reluctantly, for the wardens know the bog's secrets better than any steward in polished boots. Life here is a hush of constant damp. The wardens rise before the sun's glow lifts the mists, slipping from their huts with nets slung over shoulders, eel spears strapped to their backs. In the early hours, when the marsh is still, the birds come low, herons, bitterns, and wild ducks that fill the silence with sudden flurries of wings. A single catch means meat for the pot and feathers for trade, yet always the bog demands its share. A slip, a hidden sinkhole, the ever-present chill that seeps into bone and breeds fevers that no herbs can cure. It is said among Fenmare's elders that the deeper marsh hides more than treacherous mud. On windless nights, when the water lies black and unbroken, lights sometimes flicker where no fire should burn. Will-o'-the-wisps, the folk say, dancing above drowned peat beds, luring the unwary to their end. The wardens know better than to chase such ghosts, yet even they whisper charms under their breath when mist curls too thickly around their ankles. Children of the fen are taught to listen for the suck of mud, to keep to the rush-lined banks and never trust a dry patch too easily. Stories passed from hearth to hearth tell of greedy ground that swallows men whole, of carts heavy with reeds that vanish beneath the surface without a sound. These tales slip into dreams and drift like fog through waking thought, a reminder that in this place, the earth itself can turn traitor. Yet for all its cruelty, the outer fen offers moments of rough splendor. At dusk, when the sun dies behind a ragged horizon of reeds, the sky floods with color, pale gold deepening to bruised violet, reflected in the pools and streams until sky and water are one. The frogs take up their chorus, joined by the soft lap of water against wooden hulls. A lone warden, poling his punt homeward, becomes a shadow among shadows, his lantern bobbing like a fallen star. Once a season, word travels along the muddy tracks that a stranger has come. Perhaps a merchant seeking leeches for the city physicians, or a scribe hoping to chart the hidden ways for some distant lord. The wardens greet them warily, eyes narrowed beneath hoods pulled low. They know the value of secrets here, and coin alone will not pry the bog's knowledge from their lips. Instead, they trade favors, safe passage for a sack of salt, a story for a blade well honed. When the deal is done, the stranger drifts back the way he came, his boots heavy with mud that clings like a second skin. And so, life drifts on in this sodden border, each day shaped by the mood of water and sky. The wardens keep their watch, knowing that in a world of stone keeps and lordly halls, they are little more than a rumor, a shadow behind a drifting reed bed. Yet they endure, bound to the marsh by choice or by fate, moving like ghosts through a land too soft to hold a gravestone steady. Tonight, as you drift closer to sleep, imagine that you stand upon one of those creaking planks, the world around you lost to mist and the soft lap of hidden currents. Feel the hush of the water, the cold breath of dawn waiting beyond the rushes. For beyond these darkened channels lie other places, worse still, where hardship is written not in mud and mist, but in stone and fire. And when next we drift onward, we shall leave the fen behind for a place where the wind howls like a hungry wolf and the earth itself offers no shelter at all. Rest now, wrapped in reeds and silence, while the wardens keep watch beneath the restless stars. Far from the hush of Fenmare's sodden embrace, beyond the trembling reeds and glassy pools, the land rises in long, weary sweeps of barren hills and stony ridges. Here, where the fen relinquishes its claim, the ground turns hard and mean beneath the foot, an endless expanse of windswept moor where little grows, but stubborn heather and coarse grasses that rattle dryly beneath a restless sky. This is the highland border, a realm of thin soil and thinner comfort, where a village clings to life upon the edge of the moor like lichen on a crumbling stone. They call it Worm's Edge, though no dragon curls beneath its hills. Only the cold that creeps through marrow and settles deep in the heart of anyone who dares to make a life here. Worm's Edge squats beneath a jagged spine of granite outcrops that the old folks say were once the bones of a serpent slain by a saint whose name has long since blown away with the peat smoke. The cottages here are low and squat, built of rough stone pried from the hills themselves, their roofs heavy with turf to keep the wind from tearing them apart. In Worm's Edge, the people rise before dawn because the land demands it, not because they wish to. There is no marsh here to catch the foot, no creeping mist to swallow a careless soul. But the wind is a hunter, prowling day and night across the moor, clawing at door frames, rattling shutters, slipping its icy fingers through every crack. Firewood is precious and scarce. Few trees dare grow on this stony ground, and those that do are twisted and stunted like old men hunched against the gale. Peat is cut from the boggy pockets that gather in the hollows, but even that burns cold and sullen, filling the huts with a sour smoke that clings to hair and wool alike. Sheep are the lifeblood here. Scraggly flocks drift across the moor like pale ghosts, their thin ribs showing through filthy fleeces. The shepherds, boys barely old enough to grow whiskers and old men whose knees ache with every step, follow behind with crooks in hand, wrapped in cloaks that flap like torn sails in the wind. A lost sheep is no small thing. Each ewe means wool to spin, meat for the pot, tallow for candles that push back the winter's endless dark. The people of Worm's Edge know hunger as well as they know the taste of salt on their lips when the wind comes howling in from the distant sea. Crops struggle in thin soil, barley stunted by bitter frosts that linger long after spring should have softened the earth. In good years, they trade rough homespun cloth and smoked mutton with lowland merchants who come grudgingly up the rutted track, wagons creaking beneath sacks of salt, iron tools, and grain. In lean years, of which there are many, families tighten their belts and whisper prayers to saints whose faces have long since faded from the church's crumbling wall. Their church is a thing of pitiful pride, a squat stone building crouched beside a wind-twisted yew. Its bell has not tolled for decades. its single stained window patched with horns scraped thin enough to let in a dim glow. Yet on holy days, the people gather inside, stamping their boots and clutching each other for warmth as the priest, himself a man worn thin as old leather, mumbles mass in a tongue half forgotten. Stories linger here too, wrapped around the stones and whispered by the wind at night. Some say strange lights drift across the moor after sundown, flitting from tor to tor like restless souls. Others speak of old barrows hidden beneath the heather, their mounds long plundered, but still hungry for foolish boys who dare to dig for gold by moonlight. On nights when the wind drops, rare though they are, one might stand among the rocks and hear whispers rising from the earth, the voices of those buried beneath centuries of harsh soil and harder living. In the darkest winters, when the snow drifts high against turf walls and the sheep huddle together for warmth, the people of Worm's Edge gather around their peat fires, sharing bowls of thin broth and stories to keep the cold at bay. Mothers hush their children with tales of better places, lowland fields rich with barley, and towns where the houses stand shoulder to shoulder against the wind. But the old ones know better. They know that the moor gives nothing for free, and even dreams are too thin to feed a starving belly. Yet there is a stubbornness here too, a marrow-deep resolve that ties each soul to this bleak place. For all its cold and hunger, Worm's Edge is theirs. They know each stone, each shallow hollow where heather hides the wind's edge for a moment's respite. They know how to mend a roof with sod cut from the hill, how to share a single loaf until the next cart rattles up the track from the softer lands below. Tonight, if you listen closely, you might hear the wind clawing at the thatch, might feel the cold breath that slips through the gaps in rough stone. Picture the flicker of a small, grudging fire, its glow catching on a mother's weary face as she tucks her children beneath a threadbare blanket. Outside, the moor stretches on, a land too wild to tame, too thin to feed, yet somehow enough to bind a village to its bones. Sleep now if you can, wrapped in the moor's lonely song. For when next we travel onward, we shall leave this high, hard land behind and find ourselves in a place not of wind and rock, nor mist and bog, but of walls and shadows, where narrow streets choke with filth and danger, whispers from every corner. Rest well. Worm's Edge will keep its vigil through the night, and the wind will carry your dreams far across the heathered hills to the secrets that lie waiting beyond. Down from the bleak moorlands and the cold, whispering heights of Worm's Edge, our journey drifts toward a place where stone and man press upon each other too closely for comfort. Here, the wind does not howl quite so freely, for its breath is trapped between walls of timber and rough stone, funneled down alleys so narrow that a man might spread his arms and touch both sides at once. This is Gutter's Hollow, a quarter buried deep within the belly of a once proud medieval town whose better streets and stately houses stand far above and beyond, in the cleaner light where the Lord's banner flutters from the keep. Gutter's Hollow does not see banners or fine cloaks. It knows only the sour reek of the tannery upstream, the rancid dribble of waste that runs down its gutters, and the murmur of the restless many who call these crooked streets home. To live here is to live cheek by jowl, pressed into rooms no bigger than a stable's stall, with walls warped by damp and floors slick with things better left unnamed. It begins at dawn, if one can say that dawn ever truly comes to Gutter's Hollow. When the cock crows in the manor houses above, the hollow stirs with the scrape of shutters and the groan of doors whose hinges have forgotten the taste of oil. Children spill into the lanes first, barefoot, hair tangled, eyes wide with the hunger that follows them like a stray dog. They pick through the refuse piled high along the lane's edge, seeking rags to bind their feet or a crust of bread grown gray with mold. In these twisting streets, the sun barely touches the cobbles even at midday. Tall, leaning houses loom above, their upper stories overhanging like gnarled hands clutching for the meager light. Between them, clotheslines sag with patched tunics and stiff linens, dripping water onto passersby. Rats flourish here as bold as stray cats, feasting on scraps and creeping into thatched attics to scratch their nightly songs. Life in the hollow demands more than mere endurance. It demands cunning. For while the folk here are poor, the miseries of hunger and cold are often matched by the dangers that breed in narrow shadows. Cut purses slip like ghosts through the lanes, their eyes ever on the fat purse of a merchant, foolish enough to stray this far from the market square. Gangs of rough lads, scarcely past boyhood, stake their claims to crumbling corners and broken doorways. A loaf stolen in broad daylight, a blanket snatched from a sleeping form, such things are the wages of survival when coin is scarcer than mercy. Work comes in scraps and shreds. Tanneries belch their foul breath over the hollow, and the lucky ones earn pennies soaking hides in vats, so rank the smell seeps into skin and hair, marking a man long after the day's labor ends. Others tramp to the riverside to haul dung and filth from the street channels that drain the richer quarters above. Muck carters they are called, their carts brimming with the city's secrets, all bound for the pits beyond the walls. When night falls, and here it falls early, thick and close, candles flicker in windows patched with horn or rags. Behind each warped door, families huddle close on pallets of straw, shoulders brushing in the cramped dark. A mother hushes a child's cough with a rough lullaby, though she knows the hollow's damp breeds sickness faster than any prayer can cure it. The healer's hut sits at the lane's far bend, where an old woman measures out potions by the drop, her thin hands shaking as she takes her payment in pennies or scraps of cloth. Yet for all its filth and foul humors, the hollow hums with life in its own stubborn way. The air is never truly silent. There is always the bark of a dog, the creak of a sign above a tumbled alehouse, the hiss of whispered bargains struck in the dark corners. News travels here on quick tongues and quicker feet. Secrets slip through the hollow like rats beneath a tavern door. And sometimes, though rarely, kindness lingers too. A crust shared with a stranger, a blanket draped over a child curled beneath the eaves. Once in a while, a constable strays into Gutter's hollow, truncheon in hand, eyes wary beneath his helm. He comes to drag some hapless thief to the stocks, or to remind the hollow's folk that the law, however distant, has not quite forgotten them. But he comes with company, for alone he would vanish like coin in the dark. The folk watch him pass from behind cracked shutters, whispering of fines to come, or worse, of gaolers and gibbets waiting beyond the town gates. In the hollow, dreams grow thin and frayed as the clothes on their backs. Still, a mother may dream of better for her babe, of a place beyond these choking walls, where clean air drifts through wide fields and no gutter runs slick with waste. But the hollow is greedy and holds its people fast. To leave costs coin, and coin does not flow easily into empty pockets. So tonight, as you drift nearer sleep, hear the distant murmur of Gutter's hollow, the soft slap of water against broken cobbles, the whisper of feet slipping down an alley too narrow for moonlight. Picture the flicker of a tallow candle behind warped shutters, the hush of a lullaby rising above a baby's cough. Know that within these streets, the worst of the medieval world clings tight as a damp cloak, wrapping its folk in shadows they carry even when they dream of light. Rest now, for when next we wander, we shall climb from the stench and the shadows, up and away into stone walls and iron gates, into places where the hollow's folk might look with envy, yet find no more comfort than in their dripping alleys. Let the hollow breathe its secrets into your dreams tonight, while you drift beyond its crooked lanes to where our next tale waits in the cold echo of stone and iron. Beyond the hollow's dripping lanes and tumbled doors lies another place where misery is penned behind walls too high for hope to scale. Here, the air is not heavy with the tang of tanneries or the murmur of half-hidden alleyways, but sharp with iron and old fear, an echo that lives in every footfall upon rough-hewn floors. This place is called the Old Keep, a fortress once built to guard, now turned to cage, where stone and sorrow hold sway in equal measure. The Old Keep squats at the far end of the town's crown, perched upon a knoll of bare rock that lifts it above the muddle of timber houses and market cries. Its thick walls were raised in an age when raids came swift on horseback, and a lord's rule was measured by how high his walls climbed and how deep his well was dug. But the days of banners and sieges have slipped into tale and dust, and now the keep serves a different master, no longer a bulwark against enemy spears, but a prison to hold those whose lives have drifted into the realm of the unwanted. Inside its thick embrace, the world narrows to iron bars, straw pallets, and the constant drip of water that creeps through the cracks in ancient stone. Some who find themselves here are thieves caught lifting purses in the hollow below. Others are debtors, merchants ruined by a bad season, farmers who wagered one poor harvest too many. There are those who linger here for years on end, their crime not grave enough for the gallows, yet not slight enough for mercy. The worst place to live in the keep is not the darkness of its deepest cell, but the thin hope that sometimes flickers in the mind of a prisoner, a hope that tomorrow may yet unlock the gate. At dawn, the old keep stirs to life with the groan of iron hinges and the rattle of chains. The gaoler passes down the rows, his keys clinking like a miser's purse. He carries a lamp that throws wild shadows upon the damp walls, waking the condemned and the forgotten alike. His boots splash through puddles left by rains that seep through broken mortar and settle in hollows worn by centuries of footfalls. The prisoners rise from their straw, rubbing stiff limbs, scratching at lice that thrive in every fold of coarse cloth. Some whisper prayers to saints whose names come awkwardly to lips grown more used to curses. Others stare at the walls, tracing old marks and tally scores left by those who sat here before. Each scratch a memory of days counted and hopes lost. Food comes in the form of watery broth ladled into wooden bowls that splinter at the rim. A crust of black bread follows, if the gaoler is in the mood to hand it out whole. The clever ones save their crumbs for the rats, sharp-eyed companions who slip through the bars, bold and fat on spilled broth and secrets murmured in the dark. Some say the rats are the keep's truest masters, for they come and go as they please, slipping between walls where no man's chain can reach. Punishment here does not always wear the face of the lash or the rope. Sometimes it is simply time, slow and shapeless as the mist that curls against the keep's battlements. The days drip one into the next, marked only by the scrape of the gaoler's keys and the distant toll of the church bell that rings in the town below. For some, the greatest torture is the narrow window high above, a slit of pale sky glimpsed through a crust of frost in winter, or the gleam of rain running down the stones in spring. To see the world and not touch it, that is a cruelty all its own. Yet within these walls, life finds its stubborn roots. Men and women whisper to each other in the hush before sleep. They trade scraps of news smuggled in by sympathetic servants, rumors of pardons, of lords who may show favor, of uprisings that might shake loose the stones and fling the doors wide. Sometimes a bribe changes hands, slipping from a relative's purse to the gaoler's hidden pocket. Sometimes, when the wind howls loud enough to mask the clink of iron, a desperate soul will test the rust in a hinge or the strength of a bar. Small rebellions that rarely end well, yet flicker hope across the stones for a moment, like the brief flare of a match in the dark. And the keep holds other secrets too. Deep beneath its ground, in chambers older than any gaoler's memory, are places where the walls sweat and the air is too thin to carry a voice. It is said the worst of traitors are sent there. Men whose names are struck from record, who vanish into holes so tight they cannot stand upright nor lie flat. There, time does not pass in days, but in heartbeats counted in the dark. Yet, even above, where straw pallets line the broader cells, the keep has a way of shrinking the heart. A man who enters with a roar and boasts of his bold deeds finds his voice thinning day by day until he murmurs his regrets to the shadows. A woman who weeps for her children learns to close her eyes and let the drip of water lull her to restless dreams. Some barter their souls for scraps of comfort, an extra bowl of broth, a blanket unpocked by fleas. Tonight, as you drift nearer to sleep, hear the muffled clang of a distant iron door, the hollow echo of bootsteps on stone. Picture the narrow slit of sky above, pale and unyielding. Imagine the shape of a man sitting on straw, his back hunched, his eyes tracing the cold run of water that seeps down the wall. He dreams, perhaps, of the hollow below, of the moors beyond, of the fens where mist at least carries the breath of open air. Rest now, for the old keep shall hold its prisoners until dawn spills pale across its stones once more. And when we leave these walls behind, our path shall carry us far from iron and stone, to a place where even the wind dares not linger, where forests grow dark and tangled, and shadows hide more than any man's fear can name. Let the keep fade from your thoughts tonight, a cold echo behind your dreams, as we drift toward darker woods, waiting beyond the edge of known paths. Beyond the gray stones of the old keep, past the rutted tracks that curl like veins around the town's edge, the world unfurls into a deeper darkness, one woven not of iron bars or damp walls, but of ancient trunks and endless shadows. This is the realm of the Wordwood, a vast entangled forest where the sun's rays filter down like threads of gold, only to vanish beneath a canopy so dense it swallows light whole. Here, where branches knot like gnarled fingers and the ground is soft with centuries of fallen leaves, few souls choose to linger. Fewer still dare to call it home. Yet there are always those whom the world presses to its margins, folk who find in the Wordwood's hush a grim refuge when stone walls and village gates hold no welcome. These are woodcutters, charcoal burners, and the outcasts whose names have slipped from parish rolls like rain from a leaf. They build their huts from the forest's bones, rough timber walls lashed together with bark, thatch patched with moss and fern, roofs bowed beneath the weight of dampened time. No tidy rows of cottages here, only clearings hidden behind bramble-choked paths, marked by faint curls of smoke that rise into the canopy before vanishing into the green gloom. To live in the Wordwood is to live by the forest's moods. In spring, the underbrush trembles with life, boar rooting through the ferns, birds calling warnings from high branches. In summer, the air hangs close and damp, and the forest floor steams beneath sudden rains. But in winter, when the wind slips like a blade through the trees, the wood turns cruel. Ice forms in the thatch overhead. Wolves drift silent between the trunks, their eyes catching what little moonlight slips past the boughs. It is hunger that haunts these folk more than any beast. The forest gives berries, mushrooms, game for those skilled enough to snare it, but it takes as easily, devouring the unwary who stray from the winding deer paths. Men vanish here, swallowed not by swamp or cell, but by the living dark. Some say the Wordwood is not only wood and leaf, but something older, something that remembers. A felled tree creaks like a cry in the hush, and the wind whispers through the branches in tongues no hearth-father can name. Children born beneath these boughs learn to listen before they learn to speak. They listen for the snap of twigs beneath a wolf's paw, for the hush of an arrow loosed by a poacher, desperate enough to shoot at shadows. They learn which mushrooms lull the belly and which curdle the blood. They learn that some clearings are best left untouched, where old stones stand in rings half swallowed by root and moss. On nights when the moon climbs high and white through the canopy, even the oldest woodcutter pulls his blanket tighter and mutters a prayer, though none would admit to fearing the forest they call home. Sometimes outlaws slip between these trees, men hunted by the Lord's bailiffs, carrying more secrets than coin. They bargain with the charcoal burners for food or shelter, promising no harm, yet bringing danger all the same. A hidden bandit camp may bloom for a season deep within the Wordwood, its fires flickering low to escape the eyes of passing sheriffs. But the forest has little patience for men who think themselves masters. Branches creak beneath sudden storms, tracks vanish overnight beneath drifts of needles and fallen leaves. A careless outlaw wakes to find his fire drowned by rain and his path back lost to the maze of green and shadow. Still, there is an odd kinship here too, a fellowship born not of walls and coin, but of the hush that binds all who live beneath these boughs. A charcoal burner might trade a bundle of sticks for a clutch of mushrooms. A woodcutter's wife might share a poultice of forest herbs for a scrap of salted boar. News drifts along the deer paths like mist, word of hunts gone wrong, of children fallen sick, of a great tree struck down by lightning in the night. Such tidings weave these scattered folk together, binding them more tightly than any church bell or market square. Yet for all its harshness, the Wordwood holds a beauty that clings like dew at dawn. Shafts of sunlight catch the motes of pollen drifting like golden dust. Ferns uncurl in hidden glades where foxes watch from the underbrush. The hush itself can feel like a blessing when the world beyond brims with toil and tax and iron gates. Here in this hush, a soul might slip away from the weight of a lord's levy or a gaoler's key, if only for a night. But dreams in the Wordwood are thin things, torn by the growl of wolves and the snap of twigs in the dark. The people here sleep light, ears pricked for danger that breathes beneath the trees. When the wind rises, it speaks in voices that echo through the mind, stirring old tales of spirits that dance beneath the roots, of maidens turn to rowan trees for the price of a broken vow. Tonight, as your eyelids grow heavy, let the hush of the wordwood slip around you like a cloak of leaf and loam. Hear the wind sigh through the branches above, the distant pad of a creature you'll never see. Picture a single flicker of smoke curling from a hidden hut, where a child curls close to a mother's side, the forest pressing its breath against the rough timber walls. Rest here a while, in this green maze of shadow and root, before we drift onward once more. For when we leave the wordwood's grasp, our steps shall carry us to a place harsher still, a stretch of land so bleak and salt-bitten that even the trees turn away. There, the sea gnaws at the cliffs, and the wind sings of wrecks and widows. Sleep now, wrapped in the forest's hush, for darker winds wait beyond the boughs. Beyond the hush of the wordwood's ancient canopy lies a place where even the oldest oaks will not root, where the green hush of leaf and loam gives way to a gray and restless vastness. Here, the land meets the sea with a snarl, not a sigh, crags of jagged stone that plunge into waves forever gnawing at their base. This is the Saltreach Coast, a stretch of wind-lashed cliffs and pebble beaches where life clings as stubbornly as barnacles to a hull long abandoned to the tide. To live on the Saltreach is to live beneath a sky forever shifting, clouds torn by gales, salt spray hurled inland to sting skin and rot timber. Villages here squat low against the cliffs, roofs weighted with stone to keep the wind from tearing them clean away. Their walls are built of rough granite and driftwood dragged from the tide line, patched with tar where the storms have split the seams. The folk of the Saltreach are weathered as the rocks they call home, faces seamed by wind, voices rough as rope hauled from the sea. They live by the tides and the fickle generosity of the waves. Some cast nets from the surf, wading waist-deep into water so cold it steals the breath from the lungs. Others steer tar-black boats out into the gray chop, braving sudden squalls for the promise of herring or cod. A few gut fish on the shingle, knives flashing silver in the meager light as gulls circle overhead, waiting for scraps. But the sea does not yield its gifts kindly. Boats vanish beneath sudden squalls, their splintered hulls washing up days later to join the driftwood that litters the shore. A man might kiss his children at dawn with salt still crusting his beard, only to be carried home on a door plucked from the surf by dawn's next tide. Widows here wear their grief like shawls, thin but ever present, drawn tighter when the winds howl and the waves hammer the rocks below. There is little to farm on the Saltreach. The soil is thin, threaded with salt blown far inland by winter storms. Potatoes will grow if the wind allows it, and hardy cabbage, squat and bitter, clings to patches of ground sheltered by crumbling stone walls. Goats and skinny sheep pick their way along the cliff paths, sure-footed where men might slip to their deaths in a heartbeat. Each animal is precious, a source of milk, meat, a fleece spun rough into garments that fail to keep out the damp but ward off the worst of the cold. Trade comes here only when it must. Merchant ships fear the jagged reefs that lurk beneath the surf like teeth waiting to bite through oak and iron alike. Now and then, a brave or desperate captain risks anchoring in the shallow bay, bartering salt fish and sea coal for grain and cloth. But sometimes trade does not wait for permission. The people of the Saltreach know the sea's hidden harvest too well. When storms blow a ship onto the rocks, when the wind howls too fierce for canvas and the cliffs loom like a maw, folk gather by lantern light, waiting for what the surf will bring. Some say they help it along. That a false light may flicker from a clifftop hut on a storm-racked night, guiding a vessel where the reefs lie in wait. It is a thing not spoken of in daylight, only whispered in the hush between waves, in the creak of ropes straining in a gale. Wreckers, the inland folk might mutter, though none would dare say it to a Saltreach face. Here, survival wears many masks, and the sea demands its tithe in coin or corpse. Within the squat cottages, life is measured by the wind's mood and the fire's warmth. Driftwood burns salty and slow in hearths of rough stone. The walls sweat with brine when the storms lash too close, and every plank creaks with the sea's old lament. Children sleep wrapped in patched blankets that smell of smoke and salt, lulled to dreams by the lullaby of waves hammering the cliffs below. Yet for all its harshness, the Saltreach holds a stark beauty, a wildness that clings like spray to the skin. When the storm breaks and the sky clears, the cliffs blaze gold in the sinking sun, and the water glitters like 1,000 shards of broken glass. Seabirds wheel and cry, their calls echoing off stone older than any village huddled above. For a breath, it feels as though the world stands still, the tide paused at its edge, the wind caught in the hollow between gusts. But the stillness never lingers. The next wave comes, the next wind howls. Always the sea hungers for what it can claim. The people of the Saltreach know this truth deep in their bones. And though they curse the gales that strip roofs bare and the waves that steal boats, they stand their ground. For there is nowhere else to go, and the salt has seeped too deep into their blood to ever wash away. Tonight, as you drift nearer to sleep, listen for the hush of the surf beneath your dreams, the restless shush and crash, the whisper of wind through the cracks of stone walls. Picture a lantern swaying in a clifftop window, its flame guttering but unyielding against the black vastness beyond. Rest now on the edge of land and sea, where the worst places to live still cradle a fierce spark of life against the cold. When we leave the Saltreach behind, our steps shall carry us inland once more, to a realm where the land itself betrays those who toil upon it, where the fields yield more stones than grain, and the very earth conspires to break the back and bend the soul. Sleep well, wrapped in the sigh of the sea, for hardship waits again beyond the cliffs at dawn's first cry. Inland from the salt-lashed cliffs of the restless coast, the world settles into an uneasy hush of fields and hedgerows. But even here, where the sea's roar is lost to the rustle of wind through thorn and briar, hardship takes root in the furrows of the earth. This is the Stony Vale, a stretch of land so poor that its name is spoken with a tired shrug by those forced to break their backs upon it. At first glance, the Stony Vale might fool a passing eye. In spring, a thin film of green creeps across the fields, and the hedges tremble with birdsong. But push a plow into this earth, and it soon bears its true bones. Shards of granite and flint that crowd the soil so thickly that each furrow turns up more stone than seedbed. To farm here is to battle the very ground, and the ground rarely loses. The cottages of the vale stand scattered along narrow lanes, their walls patched with rough-coursed rubble and chinks of clay. Roofs droop beneath sod and thatch, heavy with the wet that creeps in every time the rains come. And the rains always come. No tidy market square here, no stone church rising proud above the cottages, just a small timber chapel hunched at the lane's bend, its roof so low a man must duck to pass beneath the lintel. Families in the Stony Vale know well the shape of hunger. Men rise before the first bird dares break the dark, boots caked in last season's mud, and hands raw from cold and toil. They swing mattocks and spades against the grudging earth, clearing rocks from plots their fathers cleared before them, and their fathers before that. Each generation heaps its stones into boundary walls that snake across the landscape like gray scars, dividing field from field, yet yielding no true fortune for any. A single cow, if a family is lucky enough to keep one through lean winters, means milk thin as rainwater, and a calf to trade or slaughter when hunger presses too near. A clutch of chickens scratches beneath sagging eaves, sharing their grain with sparrows and rats alike. The fields, such as they are, yield rye and barley in good years, when frost and blight do not steal the harvest before the scythe can touch it. In bad years, there is nettle soup, boiled roots, and the thin hope that next season's planting will fare better. Debt creeps easily into these lanes. The reeve comes with parchment and iron ink, scratching marks beside names of those who owe rent to the distant lord whose stone hall lies many miles away. Coins are few. Payment comes in sacks of grain, in bushels of turnips, in eggs carried by trembling hands across the muddy yard to where the steward waits astride a horse too well fed to belong in the vale. Those who cannot pay find themselves cast from cottage to roadside ditch, their fields folded into another's claim, their stones added to another's wall. Children here grow lean and sharp-eyed. They learn early how to glean the hedgerows for berries and how to pry roots from stubborn clay with sticks when frost stiffens the ground. They wander barefoot between the fields, driving skinny goats with voices hoarse from the wind that cuts across the vale unchecked. Their laughter, when it comes, is brittle, yet it rings clear for a moment before the hush of toil settles once more. In the evening, smoke curls from chimney holes to mingle with mist that rises from the sodden earth. Inside, families gather close beneath sagging rafters. A father's hands, cracked and raw, cradle a wooden bowl of pottage scraped from what remains in the larder. A mother hums an old tune while mending clothes worn so thin they almost weep at the touch. By the hearth's dull glow, children drift into uneasy sleep, their dreams haunted by visions of fields that yield fat grain and bread that does not run out before the next harvest. Yet the vale has its small mercies too, if mercy can be found in hardship endured together. Neighbors lean upon each other when famine looms, one family sharing seed potatoes when another's stores run dry, a broken roof patched by many hands before the winter snow can seep through. Stories pass from hearth to hearth, tales of a saint who once blessed this stubborn land, though if he did, his blessing has worn thin with the centuries. When death comes, and it comes often enough, it is marked with a simple grave at the edge of the fields, a cairn of the same stones the living drag from furrow and ditch. The priest from the chapel murmurs prayers over the mound, breath misting in the cold dawn, while those gathered bow heads more from weariness than reverence. Then life resumes. Stones to clear, seed to sow, debts to pay, hunger to bear. Tonight, as your eyes grow heavy, listen for the hush of the vale beneath the restless sigh of the wind. Picture a lone candle flickering in a cottage window, its flame bending toward the draught that seeps through rough stone and thatch. Hear the scrape of flint on plowshare, the clink of rock upon rock, the weary hush of a mother's lullaby drifting above the fields. Rest here a while, in the stubborn quiet of the stony vale, where life clings to thin soil and thin hope alike. When dawn comes, we shall leave these stone-riddled furrows behind and follow the winding lane deeper inland, toward a place where the land rises again, but so does its cruelty. There, among the high passes and narrow trails, lies a harshness born not of soil alone, but of stone, snow, and secrets buried deep beneath the mountain's cold heart. Sleep now, while the vale keeps its quiet watch beneath the stars. Beyond the stony vale's weary fields and endless dry stone walls, the land heaves upward once more, shrugging off the last scraps of thin soil and reaching for the sky with barren peaks and knife-edged ridges. Here lies the high pass, a realm where mountain and wind conspire to grind flesh and hope alike to dust. In the valley villages that cling like lichens to the base of these mountains, people speak of the high pass with a shiver in their voice. For though it promises a road to distant markets and foreign coin, it demands a toll steep enough to break the stoutest soul. The path through the high pass is no neat Roman road laid by legionaries in ages past. It is a scar worn into the rock by the feet of traders, drovers, and desperate folk who have little choice but to brave its cold embrace. In summer, the trail winds upward through forests of stunted pine and bracken, the air sharp with the tang of resin and cold stone. But even then, snow lurks in shadowed hollows, waiting to remind any traveler that warmth here is a fleeting guest. At the pass's crown, the trees vanish altogether, leaving only heather, scree, and the endless whistling of the wind. Here, a man might stand and see the world unfurl for miles below, valleys stitched with walls and hedgerows, rivers glinting like threads of silver. But few pause to admire such a view, for the wind cuts quick and cruel, driving sleet and grit into eyes that can ill afford to close. Those who dwell nearest the high pass live in squat stone huts, tucked into folds of rock. They roof their dwellings with heavy slate, dragged up from quarries farther down the slopes. Inside, fires burn day and night, fueled by peat or what meager brush can be gathered from the lower forests. The people here are mountain folk, thin-hipped, broad-shouldered, their faces mapped with lines drawn by cold and hunger and wind. Most scratch a living from small flocks of goats and hardy sheep that nibble moss and scrub from impossible ledges. Some trade in furs, fox and stoat snared in hidden traps beneath the pines. Others guide those who must cross the pass, leading traders and pilgrims along its winding arteries in exchange for coin or salted meat. It is a grim trade, for storms brew here with little warning, rolling in like an iron tide to swallow paths, cairns, and men alike. In the cold months that sometimes stretch near half the year, the pass becomes a thing of whispered dread. Snow piles high against stone walls until doorways vanish beneath drifts. Whole families wedge planks across windows and burn peat by the fistful just to keep the frost from creeping in. Hunger hovers in every dark corner. Should a goat slip from a ledge or a flock wander too far and vanish in the swirling white, the loss is more than meat and milk. It is warmth traded for cold, hope traded for worry. Worse still are the avalanches, sudden and merciless. Villagers tell tales of entire flocks swept away in a hush of snow that gives no warning but a deep, muffled crack, then silence where once there was life. Some say ghosts linger on the slopes, the spirits of those caught unawares in the pass's icy jaws. A lantern bobbing in a snowstorm, a voice heard through a wall of drifting white, omens that keep folk close to their hearts when the wind begins its long, keening howl. Yet life persists here, stubborn as the thorny heather that clings to the rock. Children trudge narrow trails to tend the flocks, cheeks ruddy with cold, eyes sharp for wolves that slip down from higher slopes when hunger drives them low. Women mend wool cloaks by hearthlight, stitching blessings into every seam. Little charms of bone and knot meant to turn the storm aside, though the storm rarely listens. In the deepest winter nights, families gather tight beneath thick pelts, sharing thin broth and older stories. Tales of wanderers who cross the pass with purses full of gold, or of hidden caves where warmth and safety wait for those who know the secret paths. But such stories are a salve for cold bones, not a promise. Traders speak of the pass as a cruel mistress, generous one year, snatching life away the next. Even the boldest caravans move only with caution, bells tied to mules and horses so that their clamor might warn away wolves or worse. At every bend, a cairn stands, rough stones piled by passing hands to mark the dead who fell where the wind howled too fierce, or the snow fell too deep. When the snows finally recede, the folk of the high pass emerge like bears from winter dens, blinking at the harsh spring sun. They patch walls, bury those the winter took, and coax thin grass to life in meadows that will vanish beneath frost all too soon. Their reward is survival, nothing more, nothing less. Yet among themselves, they share a fierce pride. For in the valleys below, people speak their names with a wary respect, knowing few would endure where they choose to remain. Tonight, as your eyelids grow heavy, let the mountain wind slip softly through your dreams. Hear the sigh of snow sliding from a slate roof, the muted clang of a goat's bell high on a lonely ridge. Picture a single candle flickering in a stone hut half buried in drift, its flame defying the dark that presses against the walls. Rest now, high among the pass's secret ways, for when next we wander on, our path will carry us down from these frozen heights to a place where the danger does not howl in the wind or lurk in the snow, but seeps like poison through water and blood alike. Sleep well beneath the mountain's hush. Tomorrow's road winds on. A hush falls over the bramble-wound path that twists away from the sopping marshland and leads us further, like a silver thread stitched through an old cloak, into the restless heart of the medieval world's bleakest dwellings. Tonight we drift to the edges of the known realm, where land forgets its own worth and men cling like moss to stone, enduring more by habit than by hope. We step lightly, for the ground here knows secrets older than any keep or king. The village we find tonight is perched upon the outer fringe of a vast wind-blown fen. To approach it is to walk upon damp, shifting earth that squelches underfoot. Reed and rush whisper in the dusk, and the air tastes of peat smoke and slow decay. The houses, if they dare to be called so, are squat things, half buried like warts upon the bog's brow. Sod roofs droop beneath the weight of seasons, while wattles and daubs seem to sweat moisture from within. They do not keep out the damp so much as invite it to stay. Here dwell the fenfolk, a people neither wholly free nor properly bound, living beneath the eye of some distant lord, whose name they utter only when the reeve comes to count their geese and gather the rents. By all other hours, the fen is their master and their warden. It gives them eels wriggling in wicker traps, bitterns booming among the reeds, peat for burning when wood is scarce. But it takes more than it grants. Strength from the bone, warmth from the hearth, children from the cradle. Disease lurks in every pool, and the marsh's shifting ground can swallow a careless step as surely as any beast. Inside one of these half-sunken hovels, a family gathers near a pitiful flame that flickers on sodden peat. The father, his shoulders rounded by years, stooped over eel traps, rakes at the embers with a stick, while his wife knots old cloth into a ragged covering for their youngest. The child's breath rattles, a lullaby of phlegm and frailty. In this place, death is not a sudden guest, but a quiet boarder, always nearby, waiting for its turn at the table. Their bellies grumble, half filled with pottage thin as ditch water. Barley, a few bitter greens, a sliver of smoked fish if the catch was kind. They eat in silence, for words are a luxury when every utterance must compete with the wind howling through the chinks in the wall. The mother glances at the door, where the wind tugs and sighs like a restless ghost. She wonders if tomorrow the water will rise again, creeping over the banks to claim what little dry land they hold. Outside, the fen hums with unseen life, frogs chanting their damp liturgy, owls calling from hidden perches, insects whining by the rushlight's feeble glow. It is a place alive yet lifeless, a contradiction pressed into peat and mist. If you ask the villagers why they do not leave, they will shrug. Where would they go? To the market town, where craftsmen guard their trade with suspicion? To the lord's manor, where toil is harder yet and freedom rarer still? Better the bog they know, with its soft drownings and slow fevers, than the unknown miseries of another man's land. Some nights, when the moon is heavy and round, its light pooling like spilt milk upon the fen's mirror surface, a few brave souls gather by the water's edge. They speak of spirits who guard the marsh, who accept small offerings, bits of bread, a twist of cloth, a few whispered prayers, in exchange for mercy. None know if the spirits listen, but hope is a currency too precious to squander. So they drop their tokens into the dark water and watch the ripples swallow them whole. In summer, the village festers with gnats and flies, clouds of them clinging to skin and hair, drawn by sweat and the sweet tang of human breath. The children scratch their bites raw, inviting infection into blood already thin with hunger. When the rains come, and they always come, everything floods. The pathways, the yards, the very floors beneath their beds. They stand ankle deep in their own homes, bailing water with cracked pots, knowing they will do the same again tomorrow. Yet in all this misery, small mercies flicker like rushlights in the dark. A neighbor who shares a smoked perch when the catch is good. A midwife who knows herbs to ease the fever's bite. A song hummed to restless children as the wind claws at the thatch. Tiny sparks of warmth that, for a moment, push back the endless damp. The worst place to live, some would say, is where life feels like drowning on dry land, where every breath is a gamble, every mouthful a question of enough. And yet, the fenfolk endure, generation after generation, bound not by love for the bog, but by a deeper root, the stubborn will to remain when all sense says to flee. It is a poor inheritance, passed from father to son, mother to daughter, a parcel of damp earth, an eel trap, a prayer whispered to brackish water. Tonight, the candle guttering by the hearth burns low, its flame dancing like a will-o'-the-wisp seeking freedom. Outside, the marsh breathes, a slow exhale that shrouds the village in mist. The family settles into uneasy sleep, the wind their lullaby, the damp their blanket. Tomorrow, the bog will wake again, patient and insatiable, and so too will they, stepping barefoot into waterlogged dawn, to find what scraps of life the fen will yield. And as we drift away, we leave behind the soft suzeraination of reeds, the ghost of a child's cough, the quiet defiance of people who root themselves in mud and misery, holding fast as the marsh creeps closer inch by inch, year by year. The fen takes, and the fen keeps, and still they remain. Further down the tapestry of these forgotten corners, where life bruises itself upon the harsh stones of existence, we find our feet carrying us away from the soft, deceiving embrace of the fen to a land far harsher still. The wind stiffens here, tasting of salt and brine, and the earth bears no softness to cushion weary bones. Tonight, we come to dwell among those who make their homes upon the far-flung edges of a wind-battered coastline. A cliff village where the sea gnaws the land with jaws that never sleep. Perched upon chalky bluffs, the village clings like barnacles to rock, houses wedged one against another as if bracing themselves from being torn away by the endless gales. Roofs of thatch or slate bow under gust and squall, their stones weighted down by driftwood beams, scavenged from shipwrecks and storms. Salt lies in every crevice, crusting windows, pickling skin, eating slowly at the timber until it bleaches bone white. Life here is the seas to grant or to seize. The people fish from fragile boats, little more than hollowed timbers patched and tarred so many times they resemble old scars. At dawn, these boats slip from the tiny cove below the cliffs, cutting through cold waves that swell like the breath of a sleeping giant. Men stand within, braced to the mast with rope, netting herring and mackerel and whatever else the deep might offer. Some days, the sea yields its gifts freely, nets heavy with silver catch, the promise of stew in the pot and fish to salt for leaner months. Other days, the waves are empty, and the winds carry only hunger back to shore. The women wait above, tending salt pans when the sun allows, their hands raw and cracked from raking brine into white heaps. Children gather driftwood along the tide line, always mindful of the cliff's edge, where a single slip can dash a life upon the rocks below. When storms come, and they come often, whole sections of cliff vanish overnight, swallowed into the restless gray. A home too near the brink becomes a memory by morning, its remains dashed among seaweed and shattered gulls. In the dark hours, when the hearth fire sputters beneath a pot of thin fish broth, talk drifts to the wreckers, those shadowy men who sometimes walk the cliffs at night, carrying lanterns to lure ships toward the hidden teeth of the shore. A misled captain, mistaking false beacons for safe passage, runs his vessel aground, splintering hull and spilling cargo into the surf. In the morning, the villagers gather what the waves return: planks for firewood, barrels of salted cod, coils of rope, bolts of cloth. A gift from the sea, they say with a shrug, though none speak too loudly of the drowned sailors who gave it. No one trusts too deeply here. The wind carries secrets, and the salt eats truth as readily as it does timber. Children grow quick and wary, their eyes always measuring the cliffs, the waves, and the faces around them. Old men tell tales of those who never came home, husbands swept from decks by rogue waves, sons swallowed in sudden squalls. Each year takes a few more, yet the village endures, as stubborn and weathered as the cliffs themselves. Their church sits at the highest point, a squat stone building whose bell tolls warnings of storm or death. Inside, fishermen's wives light candles for safe passage and safe return, but their prayers carry little weight against the might of the sea. Even the priest seems made of driftwood and salt, his sermons rasping like gulls crying over the waves. He buries the lost without coffin or marker, only a cairn of stones to keep the restless sea from stealing their bones. Food is never certain. Some seasons bring plenty, nets so heavy they tear, barrels brimming with pickled herring, salt pans gleaming white as bone. Other seasons withhold, and hunger creeps among the narrow lanes, slipping beneath doors like the salt wind itself. Mothers tuck their children into beds stuffed with seagrass, whispering tales of mermaids and selkies to ease them into sleep, hoping the tide will be kind tomorrow. Yet for all its cruelty, the sea is their lifeblood. They speak of it with both dread and devotion, a jealous lover who can drown them with a kiss, yet without whom they cannot live. When storms rage, they stand on the cliff's edge, watching waves batter the rocks below, each crash a hymn older than the church bell's mournful peal. They know the sea's many faces, glassy calm that lulls a boatman to drift too far, frothing rage that smashes boats like driftwood toys, secret hunger that hides rocks beneath a friendly tide. On clear nights, when the wind rests and the moon casts a path of silver across the waves, you might find them gathered by the edge, eyes turned to the horizon as though hoping to spy land where none exists. Children dare each other closer to the drop, giggling in the salt spray. Lovers meet in the shadows, their trysts hidden by the thunder of surf. And always, behind every heartbeat, lies the slow, patient scrape of the waves carving away the land beneath their feet. So they patch their boats, mend their nets, and salt their fish against the hungry months to come. They build new walls when old ones crumble into the sea. They gather driftwood and broken planks to feed their fires. They tell tales of great storms survived, of catch enough to fill every belly, of ships that ran aground on moonless nights and turned misfortune to fleeting fortune. And still they know, one day, the sea may claim them all, houses and graves alike, washing their bones among the kelp. But until then, they stay. Salt-bitten and wind-scoured, they hold fast to the cliffs, hearts tethered to the cold deep that both sustains and threatens them. And when the wind rises, they pull their cloaks tighter, glance to the dark horizon, and pray the dawn brings them home once more. Far inland now, away from the sighing of the sea and the slithering marshes, the path winds us toward a place no less cruel in its own quiet way, a lonely clearing carved into the edge of a vast, ancient forest. Here stands a small settlement, born not of choice, but of necessity, built by those who have fled the justice of man or the cruelty of their lords. It is a hamlet of outcasts, thieves, and the broken, gathered beneath the tangled arms of oak and ash where daylight seldom treads. The houses are crude things, lean-tos lashed together with bramble and saplings, or dugouts sunk into the earth and thatched with forest moss. Smoke curls thinly from pits where damp wood smolders, more choking than warming. The forest looms on all sides, its shadows thick and restless, as though the trees themselves watch every move. There are no tidy fields here, no neat hedgerows or well-tended gardens, only narrow patches where hardy roots and bitter greens are coaxed from stingy soil, hidden beneath woven screens to keep prying eyes from spotting signs of life. By day, the villagers slip like ghosts among the trees. The men snare rabbits and badgers, lift traps from game paths, or creep to the edges of more prosperous fields to steal a hen, a sack of barley, a wedge of cheese. The women gather mushrooms, bitter herbs, bark to brew into feeble remedies for lingering coughs and festering wounds. Children are taught early to step lightly, to hush their breath, to hide at the first snap of a branch that does not belong. They are wild-eyed things, half feral, clothed in rags patched and repatched with whatever scraps can be scrounged. They do not speak of where they came from. Some once served a master until they slipped the yoke in the dark of night. Some fled the gallowses, rope, or the stocks in a market square, their crimes as small as poaching a deer or as grave as spilling a man's blood. Others were cast out for sickness of body or mind, for bearing a child out of wedlock, for being simply too poor to pay rent on a plot of stony earth. Here, among the forest's hush and the hoot of hidden owls, they find uneasy refuge. At dusk, when the woods grow thick with mist and the forest floor is soft with fallen leaves, they gather at their fires, small flames cupped in pits so the glow does not betray them. They share what little they have, a handful of roots boiled in a battered pot, a rabbit turned on a spit, wild garlic for seasoning if luck has been kind. There are no priests here to mumble prayers over the meal, no reeves to count their coin or weigh their worth. Only the soft crackle of the fire, the hush of leaves overhead, and the watchful dark pressing close. Yet freedom is a thin blanket against the cold. Disease creeps easily through the clearing, passing from child to mother to neighbor. A small cut festers when there is no clean cloth to bind it. When the chill sets in, the forest becomes less a shield than a gailer. Logs are scarce, fires sputter low, frost seeps through every crack and seam. Hunger is the old friend none wish to see, yet it visits often. They know the taste of bark, of boiled leather, of weeds pulled from beneath snow. Sometimes they whisper of the lawmen who might come riding, steel-tipped and merciless. Rumors pass from ear to ear of huntsmen who sweep the woods in bands, beating the bracken with spears and dogs, seeking the hidden places where runaways nest. If caught, the price is harsh, a noose from the nearest oak, a body left swinging as a lesson to others. So each man and woman learns to vanish at the snap of a twig, to bury the fire's glow beneath damp earth, to hush children with the threat of worse things than wolves. Yet within this struggle, a strange fellowship grows. There are no titles here, no rich or poor, no master nor serf, only the living and the hiding, the hungry and the cunning. They teach one another the forest's secret tongue, which berries feed and which kill, how to follow the deer's print, how to listen for the clink of mail or the far-off bark of hounds. When someone falls ill, the whole clearing gathers herbs and roots, mashing poultices, sharing the last of the broth. When a babe is born, all stand guard, axes and knives at the ready, should any unwelcome guest break through the hush of branches. On moonless nights, stories pass from tongue to tongue, of the lives they left behind, of injustice suffered at the hands of lords and reeves, of freedom glimpsed if only for a moment. They speak too of spirits that dwell deeper in the forest, beyond even their own daring, ancient shapes glimpsed in moonlight, voices that echo without wind. Some swear these spirits guard them, misguiding hunters and turning steel to rust. Others fear the spirits, leaving small offerings of bread or bone near twisted oaks, hoping to buy safety in the dark. For all its hardship, there is a fierce pride among these exiles. They belong to no man. Their walls may be bramble, their roofs little more than leaves, but within the clearing beats a heartbeat untouched by crown or coin. They endure by cunning and by quiet mercy, one hand always on a blade, the other ready to share the last scrap of bread. So they sleep light, curled upon beds of bracken and straw, listening for the whisper of boots upon leaves. In dreams, they see the world they fled, courtyards and stocks, fields plowed for another man's wealth, whips cracked for another man's comfort. Here at least, they rise when they choose, they eat what they can take, and if death finds them beneath the canopy, it will not be as a master's chattel but as something wilder, freer, and harder to bind. And as the fire burns low, smoke drifting to join the forest's eternal mist, the clearing hums with the slow breath of survival. A rough life, but one claimed with bare hands and sharp eyes, far from the cold comfort of the law. The trees whisper overhead and the shadows gather close, hiding these souls the world has chosen to forget. The night deepens, and our quiet steps lead us on once more, winding away from the hush of the hidden clearing to a place where stone and iron rule the bones of men. Beyond the edge of the great forests and the rolling commons lies a place many know of but few speak of in gentle company. A mining village, sunk into the belly of the earth where the sun's warmth seldom reaches. Here, life is carved from rock and soot, and the air tastes of iron and despair. The village clings to a steep hillside pocked with open mouths that lead down into darkness. Shacks cluster at odd angles, pressed shoulder to shoulder, as though they fear sliding down the slope with the next hard rain. Roofs bow under the weight of sodden turf and half-frozen thatch, and black smoke leaks from low chimneys, staining the winter sky. Beneath it all, a maze of shafts worms through the ground. Crude tunnels shored with timber scavenged from far-off forests, every beam a fragile promise that the ceiling above will hold. At dawn, the village stirs with a sound that is not song, but the rasp of metal against stone, the soft coughs of men and boys readying to drop once more into the earth's cold throat. Lanterns flicker like trapped stars as they gather at the pith head, boots scuffing the churned mud, voices low and rough. Fathers and sons, sometimes no more than 12 winters old, stand shoulder to shoulder, cloth caps pulled low, faces smudged with yesterday's soot that never truly leaves the skin. They carry picks and hammers, battered baskets for ore, and the weight of knowing that what waits below can take more than it ever gives. The descent is made in crude cages of rope and timber, lowered into shafts so narrow a grown man must hunch like a beast. The deeper they go, the thicker the air grows, damp with trickling water, sharp with the tang of iron, stifled with the breath of men and the faint, creeping taste of bad air. In the blackness, their world shrinks to the circle of the lantern's glow, the steady drip of unseen water, the echo of pick on stone. Here, a man measures his worth in the weight of rock he wrests from the earth, and the days he survives without the roof of the tunnel groaning a final warning. Above ground, the women bear their own yoke. They haul water from distant streams when the village well turns to sludge. They wash sooty garments until their knuckles crack and bleed. They mend baskets, barter stale bread for a handful of oats, and whisper to children to hush their hunger until the men return. The miners' wives know the tremble of the earth that means the shaft has swallowed another. They wait by the pithhead at dusk, watching for the shapes that rise again from the dark. Sometimes the cage brings up only silence and a broken lamp. Sickness breeds here as readily as sorrow. Coal dust settles in the lungs, growing roots that choke a man slow and sure. A cough is no ordinary cough in this place, but a death sentence whispered over years. Some wear rags tied over nose and mouth, but little good it does. Dust creeps through cloth, through skin, through bone. In the cramped huts, where windows are few and warmth is rationed like coin, the sick breathe their final prayers to cracked ceilings, leaving behind widows and fatherless boys, soon old enough to crouch in the tunnels themselves. Yet the mine offers no mercy and little reward. The ore is the Lord's, the profit the master's. The miner's pay buys barely enough rye to fill the pot, a candle for the dark, a patch for a hole worn through boot or coat. Debt is a chain here, as heavy as any iron collar, binding families to the pit for generations. Some dream of fleeing, of fields and free air, but dream is all it is. Where would they go, carrying only the soot in their lungs and the hunger stitched into their bellies? Despite it all, moments of stubborn defiance flicker like embers in the dark. On holy days, when the pit lies silent and the air tastes faintly of freedom, they gather in a cleared patch of earth near the chapel, a squat stone hut blackened with soot like everything else. There they share bread and ale, play rough games that leave knees torn and spirits briefly mended. They speak of better things, a strike of luck, a richer seam, a kinder master, though all no such fancies are as thin as the daylight that barely touches the shaft's mouth. The children run barefoot through muddy lanes, skinning knees on loose stones, laughing with the mad delight of those too young to grasp how the pit waits for them, patient as stone. Their mothers watch with a love edged by fear, knowing each giggle will one day fade beneath the weight of a pick and the taste of iron. When the sun slips away, the pithhead stands quiet once more, a mouth that never closes, its breath a cold wind that seeps through every door. The miners wash what they can in battered tubs, the water turning black before it cools. They eat what little there is, fall into narrow beds, and dream uneasy dreams of the tunnels waiting for them come dawn. In the hush of night, the earth seems to whisper through the floorboards, a promise or a warning, no man can say. And so this village clings to its hillside, stitched tight to the veins of iron that run deep beneath its feet. It feeds the forges of lords and kings, yet its own people feed on hope as thin as gruel. They live by the pit and die by it, passing from father to son not wealth but a lantern, a pick, a cough that rattles like loose stone in the dark. And the mine remains, forever hungry, forever patient, swallowing dreams and daylight alike, a maw in the earth from which there is no true escape. Deeper into the realm of toil and sorrow, we drift now toward a place where even the thin comforts of village life vanish altogether. A lonely roadside stretch, scattered with the ragged shapes of those who have neither home nor patch of earth to bind them. These are the drifters, the rootless folk of the medieval road, known by many names: vagrants, beggars, wayfarers, outlaws, pilgrims gone astray. Here, life is not carved from land nor stone, but from the uncertain mercy of strangers and the fickle charity of passing wheels and hooves. By day, these souls are little more than shapes hunched beneath hedgerows or leaning against mile markers, cloaked in layers of patched cloth and frayed wool. Their possessions rattle in old sacks tied to sticks or bundled in blankets carried across weary shoulders. They sleep where the road grows quiet, under the broken arch of an abandoned bridge, against the mossy stones of a forgotten wall, in the hollows of old oak trunks where wind and rain cannot pry so easily. There are families among them, husbands and wives, children with eyes too wide and too old for their years. There are old soldiers with scars hidden beneath grimy tunics, men who once held swords in battle, but now hold only a begging bowl. There are women whose backs ache with the memory of fields they no longer till, widows turned wanderers when the last coin slipped through their fingers. And always there are the children, clutching scraps of cloth dolls, sleeping curled in their mother's arms, learning early that the road is both cradle and grave. By night, the roadside flickers with small, hidden fires, banked low to dodge the notice of watchmen or reeves. Bread, when there is bread, is torn in careful pieces and shared without question. A pot of thin stew, roots dug from hedgerows, a stolen onion, a handful of nettles, boils over embers that hiss with each passing gust. There are no houses to hold these people, no walls to gather their warmth. The only roof is the sky, indifferent and vast. Each day brings a choice: move on or risk the reeve's rod. Vagrancy is a crime in the eyes of lords and townsfolk alike, for a wanderer pays no rent, tills no field, answers to no master. A loose soul is a threat to order, or so the keepers of order claim. And so they drive them on, mile after weary mile, out of villages, away from manor gates, off the commons where sheep might graze, or peasants might murmur at the sight of ragged faces. Sometimes they find work, a day's labor in a field, mending a fence, helping lift stones for a wall no one will thank them for when it is built. A crust of bread, a cup of sour ale, perhaps a coin if the farmer is feeling more generous than cautious. But mostly the work is gone before they arrive, claimed by those who have roofs to return to. So they beg at church doors instead, lingering in the shadows when the good folks spill out after Mass, hoping for crumbs or a blessing tossed as lightly as a scrap to a dog. Along the road, danger is as constant as hunger. Wolves prowl the wilder stretches of wood and heath, drawn by the smell of unwashed skin and the promise of easy prey. Thieves prey on beggars, cruel irony in every blow, for even a wanderer's few coins or a crust of bread is worth a knife in the ribs to a man desperate enough. Sometimes the road itself betrays, ditches turn to mud traps in heavy rain, swollen rivers that sweep away children too small to fight the current, sudden storms that freeze the blood before dawn can come to thaw it. Yet for all its cruelty, the road holds a strange freedom. No reeves tally here, no lord's tax, no tithe to the manor, or forced days in a noble's fields. They move when they must, rest when they can, and answer only to the shape of the horizon. The children learn to read the wind for storms, the tracks for travelers less kind than they, the mood of the road for when to beg and when to vanish into the bracken. Sometimes a wanderer comes upon a village fair or market day, slipping among the stalls like ghosts. A coin dropped unnoticed, a loaf left unguarded. Small thefts forgiven by necessity. They do not linger, for faces are remembered, and there are stocks for those too slow to move on. The churchyard is safer, if a priest is merciful enough to share bread and turn blind eyes to a pallet made among the graves. In winter, many simply vanish. The frozen ditches hold their secrets until spring thaw uncovers bones wrapped in rags. Those who survive speak their names over the fires. Quietly, for memory is sometimes the only gravestone the poor may claim. Yet in this endless wandering, fleeting kindnesses root themselves like wildflowers among stones. A farmer's wife pressing a heel of cheese into a beggar's hand when her husband's back is turned. A passing pilgrim who leaves behind a woolen shawl for a coughing child. A merchant's boy who drops an apple from his cart and pretends not to see who picks it up. Such moments keep the drifters walking, mile after mile, trusting that somewhere ahead the road may yet turn kinder. And so they drift, these forgotten souls of the medieval road, carrying stories stitched from hunger and hope, from small mercies and countless rejections. Each mile behind them grows as cold as the mile ahead, yet still they lift their feet when dawn stirs the crows from the hedgerows, shoulders hunched, eyes on the horizon that never comes closer. No land to call their own, no hearth to hold their dreams. Only the road, always the road, winding on into the hush of an indifferent world. Beyond the wandering feet and the restless miles, there lies another corner of the medieval world where life proves just as merciless, though the chains here are not iron, but hidden behind high stone walls and cloister gates. Tonight we drift to such a place, an isolated monastery perched atop a wind-scoured rise where winter clings long into spring, and the hush of prayer is thick enough to drown a man's own voice. At first glance, one might believe this holy retreat a refuge from the harshness of the outer world, a sanctuary for those weary of toil and sin. Its thick walls hold back the biting wind. Its chapel glows by candlelight when darkness claims the hills. But within these walls, the worst hardships are not always of body, but of the spirit and the mind, bound tight in silence and routine until even the soul feels shackled. The monks wake before the sun dares rise, roused by the toll of a single bell echoing cold through narrow passages. They rise from straw pallets in unheated cells, small stone chambers so bare that even the breath seems reluctant to linger. Robes are donned in the dark, coarse wool against raw skin. No warm fire greets them, only the promise of cold stone beneath their feet and a day measured out in chants, prayers, and ceaseless labor. The first prayers break the hush of dawn, their voices weaving Latin verses into the chill air of the chapel. Candles flicker like pale stars against the vaulted gloom, and the shadows of bowed heads dance along the worn flagstones. There is beauty here, yet it is beauty born of submission. Each word uttered not for oneself, but for an unseen promise of grace in a life where earthly warmth is rationed like grain in a poor harvest. When prayers end, the work begins. Some tend the meager gardens that claw at stony ground beyond the cloister walls, coaxing stubborn roots from the thin soil, fingers numb with frost or blackened with damp earth. Others toil in the scriptorium, bent for hours upon splintered benches, ink staining fingers as they copy holy texts with aching precision. A slip of the quill means hours lost, penance earned, and more prayers whispered to ease the shame of wasted parchment. Meals come twice a day, thin broth, coarse bread, perhaps a lump of cheese if the stores have not yet dwindled to crumbs. Silence reigns even here. Mouths move only to chew, eyes fixed upon a brother who reads aloud from scripture, while the rest break their fast with eyes lowered. Each swallow is taken in the cold, for fires are a luxury save for the chapel and the prior's chambers, not for the refectory where dozens gather elbow to elbow, sharing warmth only in the steam of breath. For the lay brothers, life is harder still. They rise before the monks to tend the animals, mend the walls, drag stones from distant fields to patch leaks, and shore up the cloister's sagging bones. They labor until their backs bow and their hands blister, yet theirs are the voices seldom heard in the prayers that fill the chapel's hush. They kneel in the same cold shadows, but stand at the edge of every sermon, half servant, half brother, wholly spent by dusk. And always, the silence. A vow that cuts deeper than any blade, a silence meant to draw a man closer to God, yet often leaving him alone with the noise in his own mind. Words unsaid turn inward, birthing doubts that fester beneath the tonsure. A question asked aloud might earn penance, days of fasting, nights kneeling in the chapel until knees bruise upon cold stone. Confession comes only to the prior's ear, and even then, mercy wears a stern face. Outside the walls, seasons turn. Peasants toil, lords squabble, merchants bicker over coin, but within the monastery, each day is much like the last, an endless river of prayer and labor, broken only by the tolling of the bell that governs every breath. Some find solace in this sameness, believing each hour brings them closer to the divine. Others find only the gnawing cold of doubt, the restless scratching of questions that will never find answers, while silence binds their tongues. Illness slips easily among the cloistered halls, where bodies weakened by fasting and hard stone floors surrender quickly to coughs and fevers. When a brother falls, he is tended with bitter herbs and whispered prayers, but all know that death here is neither unexpected nor mourned too loudly. The body is laid in the chapel, candles flickering by the shrouded form as chants rise to the vaulted ceiling, carrying the soul away from stone and silence to whatever awaits beyond. Yet within these gray walls, tiny kindnesses persist. A cup of broth slipped to a brother too weak to work, a warm cloak draped over thin shoulders, a shared glance that says what vows forbid. In the scriptorium, an illuminated letter tucked in the margin, bright pigment curling in secret rebellion against the endless black lines of sacred text. Small rebellions, small mercies, hidden embers that keep a soul from freezing entirely. When night comes, prayers rise again, final words spoken before sleep takes hold in the narrow cells. Outside, the wind claws at stone and shutter alike, howling through the courtyard where the gardens sleep beneath frost. The monks drift to uneasy rest, some dreaming of the next life's warmth, others haunted by the weight of silence they carry like stones in their pockets. And so the monastery endures, walls heavy with prayers and secrets, its doors open to the world yet shut tight around those who dwell within. A place meant to save the soul, yet just as often a prison for men who dream of warmth they are forbidden to seek. Here, where holy words echo cold off ancient stone, one learns that the worst place to live is sometimes a place chosen willingly, when the walls that bind are built not of mortar and timber alone, but of faith, fear, and the hush of unspoken doubts. Now let us drift once more, leaving behind the monastery's cold hush for a place no less confining, yet filled not with prayers, but with the restless clamor of the condemned. Tonight we stand before the heavy gates of a medieval town's prison, a grim stone keep where those who have strayed too far from the laws of land and Lord find themselves shut away from light and air and all but the bitter company of one another. The prison squats at the edge of the market square, its thick walls slick with moss and years of damp. Iron bars rust in their sockets, and wooden doors groan under bolts so heavy they must be dragged shut by more than one man. There is no warmth here, save for the breath of too many bodies packed close, and the stink of fear and filth clings to the air like a curse that will not lift. Within these walls, the cells run deep, low stone chambers lined with straw fouled by rats and damp with the seep of groundwater. Lanterns flicker feebly in narrow halls, their glow swallowed by shadows that gather in corners where desperate eyes and grasping hands wait. The prisoners are chained in pairs or threes, shackled at ankle or wrist, their movements limited to the few paces their manacles allow. Some are thieves caught with a stolen loaf, others debtors who failed to pay a lord's due, and others still are men and women accused of crimes darker yet, poaching the king's deer, striking a reeve, whispering treason in the wrong company. The walls know all their secrets, their regrets, their bitter bargains struck in hope of a lighter sentence. They know, too, the hopeless ones who have given up bargaining altogether and lie curled on the straw, eyes fixed on the ceiling stones, as though searching for a chink through which the sky might slip. The jailers stalk the corridors with keys that jangle like the devil's laughter, eyes always watchful for a hidden blade or whispered plot. Some are cruel for the sport of it, prodding prisoners awake with iron-tipped rods, snatching away a scrap of bread to remind them who rules here. Others are indifferent, shadows in padded cloaks who carry out their duties with a shrug, a man suffering no more to them than the scurrying of rats at their feet. Food, if it can be called so, is a bowl of thin gruel and a hunk of black bread, tossed through the bars by a gaoler who does not care if it lands in filth or straw. Water comes from a single barrel down the corridor, brackish, stale, often fought over by the desperate when the guard's back is turned. Disease thrives here. Coughs echo through the corridors at night like the hacking of saws, and fever burns through the cells unchecked. A prisoner who falls ill is left to rot, sometimes shackled to another who must watch as life ebbs away by inches. Yet it is not only hunger and sickness that break the spirit, it is the waiting. Time drags in a prison like an unwelcome guest. Some prisoners know the date of their reckoning, a hanging, a flogging, a branding at the market square for all to see. Others do not know at all, left to wonder if the turnkey's next visit will be their summons to the gallows or the block. Whispers pass in the dark. Whose name was heard at the gaoler's table? Whose crime has caught a lord's eye? Who has bribed whom for mercy or escape? Sometimes a cell erupts in quiet defiance. Two men sharing scraps of stale bread, a woman carving her name into the wall with a hidden nail, as though the stone might remember when no one else will. Stories are traded like precious coin, boasts of freedom, half-remembered songs, tales of life before the bars slammed shut. For a heartbeat, they are more than prisoners. They are people once again, with mothers and loves and fields left fallow somewhere beyond the walls. But the night is long, and the walls are thick, and hope is a candle with little wax here. Rats scurry through the straw, bold enough to nose at sleeping flesh. The chill seeps up from the stone, stealing what little warmth the thin blankets offer. Some prisoners huddle in pairs for warmth, the iron bite of their chains the only thing that keeps them from drifting too far from one another in sleep. Once a week, perhaps, the priest arrives, his cloak damp with the sweat of fear or pity, none can say. He speaks the rites to those near death, listens to confessions with a distant ear, promises absolution that tastes of cold ashes to those who know the rope or the axe waits no matter the mercy of heaven. His candle flickers through the corridor, a small flame that leaves more darkness behind than it drives away. When the door bolts groan open in the dawn, the prisoners rouse with dread or with dull indifference. Some will be marched to the square, shackled before the gathered crowd to face the stocks, the whip, the jeering of neighbors who cast rotten vegetables and foul words in equal measure. A few will not return. Fewer still will return to freedom. Yet behind the bars, life clings stubbornly to the bones that bear it. In the shadows, a whispered promise of escape blooms like mold on damp stone. Some watch for the soft-hearted turnkey, the loose brick, the moment when rain and thunder cover the sound of file on chain. Most such hopes end in darker punishment, but now and then, just often enough to stoke rumor, a man slips the walls and vanishes into the night, leaving only a chain abandoned like a shed snake's skin. And so the prison stands, its stones heavy with secrets and despair, a place where freedom shrinks to the width of a chain, and mercy comes too late to save the flesh from hunger, cold, and the endless echo of footsteps in a corridor that never ends. It is here, behind bars slick with years of rust and sorrow, that a man learns the harshest truth of all. that the worst place to live may be one where a life is caged but never quite ended, left to wither slowly while freedom walks free just beyond a wall of stone. We drift now from iron bars and damp stone corridors to another corner of medieval life, where freedom, though unchained, proves no softer a bed. Beyond the bustling towns and the keep's shadow, past fields stitched with furrows and hedgerows, there lies the open heath, a lonely expanse where soil gives grudgingly and wind holds dominion over all who dare settle beneath its restless breath. Here dwell the shepherds, scattered souls who tend flocks upon lands too barren for crops, yet too wide to lie fallow. Their huts are rough shapes of turf and timber, crouched low against the endless gusts that sweep the moors and high downs. A single room serves all, man, wife, child, sometimes even the lamb too frail to stand the night's cold alone. Smoke leaks from turf chimneys, sharp with the scent of dung and peat. Fuel wrested from bog and pasture when no forest stands near to offer its bounty. By daylight, the shepherd walks, always walks, across open miles that stretch from one horizon to another. His flock, a motley gathering of hardy sheep, drifts where the grass clings to the thin soil in patches like frayed cloth. Crook in hand, dog at heel, he scans the sky for signs of storm, the earth for wolf tracks, the woolly backs for signs of rot or pest. There is no hedgerow here to pen the beasts, no stout fence to ward off prowlers, only the shepherd's watchful eyes and his constant tread, boots worn thin long before they can be replaced. He eats when he can, coarse bread tucked in a pouch, a hunk of cheese hardened by the wind, an onion if fortune has been kind. Water is drawn from shallow pools clouded with the trampling of hooves. And while he eats, his eyes never stray far from the sheep, for one lost to the bracken or the fangs of dusk is a coin gone from his master's purse, sometimes from his own meager tally too. For most shepherds own nothing but the crook in their hand and the rags on their back. The flock is the Lord's, the land another man's holding. The hut, though patched and repaired by the shepherd's own labor, stands on soil he does not own. His wage, if it can be called so, is the right to keep his family fed, barely, and perhaps a fleece or two when shearing season comes, to trade for salt or oats or a single new pair of boots if the winter has been cruel. Winter is always cruel on the heath. The wind whips without mercy, carrying sleet sideways through every crack in turf walls and thatch roof. At night, the shepherd's wife presses children close to her side, muffling their coughs in wool blankets that smell of lanolin and smoke. The shepherd himself lies wakeful, ear tuned to the wind's wail for the cry of a ewe in trouble or the hunting yip of wolves. Many nights, he rises and pulls on boots still damp from the day, stepping into the storm with only the dog's eager bark to keep the dark at bay. Disease and hunger creep easily across such open land. A harsh spring may leave ewes barren or lambs too weak to stand. Hoof rot spreads in wet years, and fevers find the children who grow too fast on too little milk. If a sheep sickens, it is a blow to the shepherd's belly as much as the Lord's purse. He knows each animal by sight, where it limps, how it strays, which lamb favors which patch of moss among the gorse. The flock is his charge, his curse, and the only inheritance his sons may ever claim is the right to walk behind him, boots sinking into the same muddy ruts. Yet among this life of toil, a shepherd knows a kind of solitude that is both burden and balm. He learns the sky's moods, how to read the roll of clouds and the promise of rain before the first drop falls. He knows the taste of the wind, the secrets of the hawthorn hedge where the fox slips through at dusk, the hum of the moor when dusk gathers and the curlew cries overhead. Some call it freedom to live so wide and open. The shepherd knows it as a freedom paid for with hunger and chill and the weight of 1,000 steps that leave no mark once the wind smooths the grass behind him. Sometimes he meets another like him, a shepherd from the next holding, crossing with his flock where borders blur into heath and bramble. They nod, share a drink if there is one, pass a word or two of wolves seen or a lamb found wandering. Then they part again, each returning to his quiet kingdom of wool and wind. At lambing, the work doubles. Days blur into nights without sleep, as ewes drop their young in the teeth of storms, as helpless new life shivers beneath coarse fleece and the shepherd's trembling hands. He coaxes warmth into wet bodies with his own breath, tucks them into folds of his cloak, sometimes brings the weakest to lie by the hearth where his wife cradles child and lamb alike, two fragile things whose lives flicker as easily as the flame that warms them. When the wind finally softens and the sun grows kind, the shepherd stands watch over his flock in the hush of dawn. The dog circles wide, a black dot against the pale sweep of grass. The sheep graze, heads bent, wool already gathering the green scent of summer. He rests his chin upon his crook and listens. To the wind, to the silence, to the distant promise that tomorrow he will rise and walk again, step after weary step, across land that belongs to another, tending life that is never truly his own. So the heath holds him, year upon year, a kingdom without walls, yet no less confining than the stoutest prison. For a shepherd's worst burden is not the cold nor the hunger, but the knowing that this wind-scoured land will ask the same of his sons and their sons after them. To walk the same wide miles, to guard what is never theirs, and to find in the endless hush of the heath both the hardest loneliness and the only freedom they will ever know. Now the hush of the open heath gives way to yet another shadowed corner of medieval life, a place not so much built as bound together by necessity and decay. Tonight, we step into the squalid tangle of an urban slum, a ragged cluster of hovels pressed against the outer wall of a bustling market town. Here, life festers in the narrow alleys where filth and fortune brush elbows yet never share the same table. The slum crouches in the lee of the town's timbered houses and proud stone guild halls, as if the city itself were ashamed to own this quarter, yet cannot rid itself of the poor who cling like burrs to its skirts. The lanes are little more than muddy cuts between leaning walls of wattle and daub, patched with rags and straw where cracks let in the rain. Roofs sag under the weight of missing tiles and rotting thatch. When it rains, the streets become slow rivers of refuse, slops from cooking pots, the offal of the butcher's trade, the sour leavings of too many bodies crowded too close. By daylight, the slum hums with a restless, ragged life. Women stand ankle-deep in muck at washtubs fashioned from broken barrels, scrubbing linen so thin it tears at a sigh. Children, their legs spindly and bare even in winter's chill, dart through the alleys on errands or petty theft, pockets stuffed with apple cores or crusts begged from the tavern's back door. Men gather where there is work to be sniffed out, at the docks to haul fish from reeking boats, at the tannery where hides soak in vats that eat through boot soles as surely as they eat through skin. For most, work is never enough. A day's wages vanish into stale bread, bitter ale, a handful of onions to throw into the pot with bones picked clean weeks ago. Debt clings like a second skin. A missed rent means eviction from a hovel hardly worth the name, yet still the only shield against the cold that prowls the streets at night. Many families sleep 5 to a room the size of a hayloft, bodies pressed together for warmth when no fire burns on the hearth because fuel costs more than supper. Disease makes its roost here as easily as rats. Coughs echo down the narrow lanes, wet and hacking, punctuated by the thin wails of infants too young to know the chill they have inherited. When plague comes, and it always does, sooner or later, it finds welcome ground in the slum's crowded rooms. The city's well-to-do lock their doors, post guards at gates, yet the sickness slips through cracks, riding on fleas, on the breath of a beggar who once swept a noble's steps. Charity comes in flickers. Some lord's lady handing out crusts at the church door, a monk with a basket of spoiled vegetables, a healer who offers herbs boiled in water that tastes of the river's filth. Such kindnesses ease a day's hunger, perhaps a night's cough, but never the deeper want that lives in the bones. The poor line up, heads bowed, hands outstretched, hoping for a morsel, a blessing, a scrap that will carry them to dawn. Not all wait for mercy. Some take what they need where they find it. Pickpockets slip through the market crowds, blades no longer than a finger, yet sharp enough to cut a purse string or a throat if cornered. Fences operate behind shuttered doors, trading stolen trinkets for bread and salt, and a few coppers to pass to the next desperate soul. The bailiff's men prowl by night, boots thumping through the mud, looking for those too bold or too unlucky to stay hidden. Stocks in the square are seldom empty, and the pillory wears the marks of spit and rotten fruit like a badge. Yet for all this harshness, even here life clings stubbornly to its brittle thread. In the evenings, when the market's noise softens to the hush of guttering lamps, Neighbors gather at doorways to share a cup of thin ale, to trade gossip and small comforts. Mothers hush babes with lullabies older than the walls around them, tunes carried from fields their grandparents once worked before poverty herded them behind city gates. Boys crouch around dice games in the shadows, eyes wide with dreams of fortunes they swear they'll one day claim beyond these crooked alleys. Sometimes, a stroke of luck lifts one above the grime, a laborer who wins the favor of a guildmaster, a girl whose quick tongue or fair face finds her a place in some merchant's house as a maid rather than a beggar. But the slum remembers its own. Even those who climb too often find their fortunes slip through cracks in the boards until they fall back, bruised and poorer than before. When dawn comes, the alleys wake in a chorus of coughs, cries, the clatter of buckets drawing sour water from a well choked with weeds and rotting scraps. Mothers sweep muck from doorsteps that will be filthy again by nightfall. Boys shoulder baskets. Girls slip away to market stalls with bundles of rags to sell for pennies. And always the thin, hungry hope hums beneath it all, that tomorrow might bring work, a crust, a copper coin more than today. So the slum stands, huddled against the town's proud walls, hidden yet never truly out of sight. A place where life is measured in stale bread and borrowed shelter, where each breath tastes faintly of smoke and spoiled meat. And though its alleys lie ankle-deep in filth, its people dream as stubbornly as any noble behind high gates, clutching at scraps of warmth and laughter in the narrow dark, and trusting that even the worst place to live might yet hold a crack wide enough for hope to slip through. Far from the bustling towns and the well-kept castles, the ragged marshlands stretched in endless gray pools beneath a low, sullen sky. It was here, in this weary sprawl of mud and mist, that some folk found themselves tethered by birth or misfortune, those who had no means to flee, nor kin to take them in elsewhere. Here, the land itself seemed a living thing that clung to the hem of one's tunic, sucking boots into its sodden mouth and refusing to let go. Many a weary peasant trudged each dawn through knee-deep bog to reach strips of peat that could be cut and dried for fire. Though the warmth gained was so meager, it seemed a cruel jest by nature herself. It was the marsh dwellers, thin and stooped from toil, who whispered tales of the fen spirits and will-o'-the-wisps that lured men deeper into the quaggy maze. Some said they were but tricks of the eye, gases from the rotting reeds, but others swore they heard faint laughter among the mist, a giggling that led them astray till they sank where no rescue could reach. There were no roads here worth the name, only winding causeways of sodden planks laid by trembling hands, forever needing repair. A misstep could cost a child its life. Yet still, people stayed, for the Lord's lands must be worked, and where else could they go? One such family made their dwelling in a lean-to of wattle and daub perched upon the least sodden patch they could claim. Brannock, the father, rose before the sun each morn, his back bent before his years. His wife, Aelith, tended to thin goats who gave sour milk from grazing on reeds, while their two children, little Edric and Willa, chased what scraps of warmth they could find near the hearth, which forever smoked and never truly warmed. The marsh seeped into their bones. Coughs lingered, and fevers came in the damp nights when the wind howled like a sorrowing hound through the gaps in the thatch. Still, life clung on in stubborn breaths. At the marsh's edge, Brannock dug peat by day and set snares for waterfowl by dusk. If luck was kind, he might catch a duck or two, but more often than not, the traps filled with stinking bog water and nothing more. Aelith mended what few garments they owned, her fingers red and raw from the chill, while the children roamed the reedy fringes, looking for frogs and eels, anything that might fill the pot for supper. And always there was the fear of drowning, of sickness, of the Lord's reeve who came to collect rents that never shrank, no matter how poor the harvest. On certain nights, when the winds calmed and the bog lay quiet, Brannock would sit outside his lean-to and stare across the pools of black water that reflected the pale, fretful moon. He would recall, in faint heartbeats, that he once dreamed of leaving, of finding higher ground where the soil bore wheat instead of rot, where the air smelled of heather instead of the sour stink of bog gas. But dreams here were thin things, easily smothered by wet moss and worry. So he stayed, digging and cutting, his hands forever stained with peat. In the marsh village, If one could call a scatter of huts a village, folk clung to each other for warmth of spirit more than warmth of hearth. They shared what they could spare: a clutch of eggs, a handful of salted fish, a story to hush the children to sleep. Old Hedda, who claimed to be a midwife, though none could tell her age, gathered the folk sometimes to tell them tales of how the marsh had once been dry land before some ancient curse drowned it. She spoke of a buried tower at its heart where a cruel lord once ruled, and now his spirit cursed the ground to swallow any who trespassed too deep. The children huddled close, wide-eyed, not knowing whether to laugh or shudder. Yet even fear could not keep them from the marsh's gifts. There were rare herbs to be found if one dared: sweet flag for fevers, marshmallow root for coughs, sedge for weaving mats. Some men tried to hunt otters and beavers for pelts, but they were clever creatures quick to vanish beneath the oily waters, leaving only a ripple and a mocking splash behind. Now and then, traders came in flat-bottomed boats, offering salt, cloth, or iron in exchange for pelts or peat blocks. The villagers' eyes lit up at the rare chance to barter, but the traders were shrewd and the folk desperate. Deals were never fair. When the rains came, they did not come softly. They fell in endless gray veils, turning the marsh into a deeper mire, flooding paths and drowning hopes. The lean toes leaned harder under the weight of water. Ducks nested in the abandoned corners of huts where families had fled or perished. And in the hearts of those who remained, there was a quiet, stubborn ache, a longing for dry feet, for a fire that truly warmed, for a roof that did not drip. But longing was as useless as dreams here, for the marsh gave nothing it did not wish to reclaim. One evening, as dusk gathered its purple shadows over the reeds, Brannock trudged home with empty snares and a bundle of wet peat strapped to his back. He paused at the causeway where the planks swayed underfoot. There, across the misty pool, he glimpsed the flicker of a light, too steady to be a will-o'-the-wisp. For a moment, hope stirred. Perhaps it was a passing boat, a trader with dry bread or salted pork, a chance to barter away some part of his burden. Or perhaps it was something else entirely. Another tale waiting to be told by old Hedda by the smoky hearth. He stood there balancing between one step and the next, while the marsh sighed and shifted around him. Somewhere beyond the fog, the world promised other places: high hills, sturdy cottages, warm hearths that banished damp. But the marsh clutched at his feet, as it always did. Brannock lowered his head, adjusted his burden, and stepped onward, the bog planks creaking beneath his weary boots. The promise of dry land, no more than a dream swallowed by the endless gray. Beyond the marshes where Brannock and his kin dwelt, another place of harsh living awaited those whose birth or misdeed had chained them to its barren soil. The wind-swept highlands where stone and heather reigned, and the land seemed forever at war with those who tried to tame it. Here, in the crags and gullies of a rugged upland, life was a bitter thread spun from cold and hunger, woven through with the howling wind that never truly ceased its mournful song. The Highlanders built their dwellings from whatever the earth begrudgingly offered, rough stones piled atop one another, bound with heather and sod to keep the worst of the wind at bay. Roofs were thatched with reeds or covered in turf, giving the huts a look as though they sprouted from the hills themselves. Smoke seeped from peat fires, mingling with the constant mist that clung to the rocky slopes like a half-forgotten dream. Among these people lived Katrin, a widow whose husband had perished beneath a landslide while digging a meager vein of tin in the cliffs above. Left with 3 sons too young to bear pick or spade, she took in spinning and mending from neighbors as poor as herself, trading her weary hands for scraps of oat bread and the smallest measure of goat's milk. Her fingers were always cracked and raw, her cheeks hollow from winters where she ate less, so her boys might eat at all. Winter came early to the highlands and lingered long after the lowlands had awakened to spring. Snow crept down from the peaks, burying sheep and grazing goats alike, forcing the folk to gather close within their smoky huts. Some nights, when the wind screamed down the passes, it seemed the stones themselves might shatter under the cold's cruel hand. Children shivered in beds of bracken and old pelts, while the eldest of each family huddled near the hearth to coax the last embers to life with scraps of peat or dried dung. Food was always a worry, but more so when the herds failed. The soil here was thin, stingy with what it yielded, oats and barley clung to rocky fields like stubborn weeds, and a single storm could flatten a harvest overnight. When the stores ran low, folk scoured the hills for edible roots, braved icy burns to catch trout, or traded what little wool they could shear from half-starved sheep. Hunger was an old ghost in the highlands, never seen but always felt in the hollow of the belly, the weakness of the limbs. Yet still they stayed. Some by choice, for the highlands were freedom to those who would bend knee to no lord but the one they chose. Others stayed because there was nowhere else to go. No lowland village would welcome mouths it could not feed. No manor wished to take in ragged highlanders who brought only empty hands and fierce pride. So the people clung to the stones and the heather and the bitter wind, raising rough walls against the cold and telling stories to warm the blood when the fires burned too low. Katrin's eldest boy, Lewin, had reached his 12th winter when he began to roam farther afield, hoping to find game in the wooded ravines that cut through the hills. He set crude snares for rabbits, his fingers red with cold as he baited traps with crumbs from his own supper. Often he returned with nothing but frostbite and a bitter stare, but sometimes, just sometimes, he brought back a skinny hare or a brace of grouse that seemed a gift from some kinder spirit hidden among the cliffs. On one such hunt, Lewin came upon an old man crouched by a spring, his cloak patched and ragged, his beard white as the snow that drifted about them. The old man looked up with eyes like tarnished silver and asked Lewin for a piece of bread. Lewin, though his own stomach clawed at him, tore his last heel of oatcake in half and offered it. The old man nodded once, took the bread, and vanished into the swirling flurries without another word. When Lewin returned home that night, a grouse was waiting in his snare, fat and plump as if laid there by the hand of the wind itself. Katrin, who heard his tale, crossed herself and whispered that the old spirit still watched the hills, rewarding kindness where they found it. But kindness alone did not fill bellies through the long months of cold. There were always tales of families who vanished into the drifts, whole huts found empty come spring, doors left swinging open as though the wind had swallowed them whole. The Highlanders spoke little of these disappearances, for fear bred silence as much as it bred caution. Better to tell the children stories of clever foxes and brave hunters than speak of neighbors who had simply given up, curled beneath threadbare blankets, and let the snow bury them in mercy. Despite the hardship, the Highland folk held their pride close. They gathered on rare fair days when the thaw came, trading wool and salted fish with wandering peddlers who risked the mountain passes. Music would rise in thin, reedy notes from old pipes and battered drums, echoing off the crags, while children danced barefoot on the thawing earth. For a few precious hours, the cold and hunger loosened their grip, and laughter rose like smoke into the pale sky. Katrin watched her boys grow lean but tall, their eyes sharp as kestrels as they learned to read the land's moods, when to plant the scant oats, when to mend the dry stone walls against the lambing storms, when to climb the cliffs to fetch lost sheep. She knew they would leave someday, perhaps seek better soil in the valleys below, but for now they were hers, bound to this wind-lashed place by blood, and the stubborn hope that next winter might be kinder. In the end, it was not the wind nor the cold, nor even the gnawing hunger that made the highlands one of the worst places to live, but the relentless sameness of it all, the knowing that tomorrow would bring the same battles, the same winds, the same thin soup in the same cracked bowl. And yet, woven through that grimness, was a fierce spark, a pride that no storm could quench entirely, a memory of freedom that lingered in each stone and gust of heather-scented air. Beyond the highlands and the sullen marshes, there stretched yet another domain where life ground its people down to the bone. Deep within the heart of the forest, where the canopy shut out the sun and the world seemed forever dusk. The woodland villages, if they could be called such, were hidden among ancient trunks of oak and ash, their roofs of moss and timber blending so well with the shadows that a stranger might pass within a stone's throw and never know a soul lived there. It was here, under the endless green gloom, that woodcutters, charcoal burners, and resin gatherers eked out their meager lives. Men and women whose days began in darkness and ended in darkness, their hands blistered by axes and saws, their lungs blackened by the smoke of smoldering timber piles. The forest gave them fuel and timber, pitch and game, but always at a price. For the forest was a thing alive, older than any stone keep or crowned king, and not easily bent to the will of humankind. Among these shadowed folk lived a man called Wulfric, whose father and grandfather before him had burned charcoal in the same hidden glade. Wulfric's world was a circle of trees, the hush of fallen needles beneath his feet, the smell of sap and smoke that clung to his clothes, no matter how often he tried to wash it away in the stream. He knew each tree by its bark and bend, each path by the soft indent of cartwheels in the mud. Yet for all his knowing, he held no power here, only a wary respect for the way the forest could swallow a man whole if he strayed too far or grew too bold. Each spring, Wulfric and his kin raised their charcoal clamps, great mounds of split logs stacked like ribs of a sleeping beast, covered in turf and sod, then fired from within. The clamps burned for days, watched through rain and wind lest they flare too hot or die too soon. Nights were spent in makeshift huts beside the smoldering heaps, the air so thick with acrid smoke that eyes watered and throats rasped raw. Yet charcoal fetched coin. Coin needed to pay the lord's due, buy salt and iron tools, mend what little needed mending in their rough lives. Wulfric's wife, Maud, tended a small garden of turnips and cabbages near their timber hut, though the forest's shade grudged every stalk of green. Their eldest girl, Alina, helped gather resin from wounded pines, tapping the sap into small clay pots that would be sold to pitch boats or seal leaks in thatch. The youngest, a boy called Orm, roamed the underbrush with snare and sling, hoping for a rabbit, though the forest creatures were cunning and scarce. Wolves, too, moved in the deeper groves, thin and desperate in winter, bold enough to trail the scent of blood when a snare did its grim work. Life here was never safe. A fallen branch could break a man's back. A careless slip of an axe might mean bleeding out alone beneath the hush of the boughs. Worse still were the forest lords, the reeves sent to watch the king's timber, who cared little for the folk who sweated and bled to bring that timber to market. Poaching a stag or felling the wrong tree could see a man's hand taken, or his ear nailed to the village post for a day and a night while the children wept at the sight. Yet danger also came from things not seen. Old tales told in hushed voices around the campfires of green spirits and woodwives who led men astray if they whistled after dark. Some said they had glimpsed pale shapes moving between the trunks at twilight, or heard the echo of laughter where no human voice should be. Wulfric himself, though never one for fancy tales, kept a sprig of rowan tied above the hut door, for his mother had done so and her mother before her, and who was he to test what he did not understand? When storms came, the forest turned wild and alive. Wind shrieked through the canopy like wolves let loose, and trees groaned and cracked in the darkness. Branches fell like axes from unseen hands. Families huddled inside their mossy huts, listening for the splitting of timber that might crush roof and bone alike. When dawn came, they emerged to find new paths blocked by fallen giants, clamps smashed and fires smothered. Days of work undone in the space of an hour's storm. Still they rebuilt, for the forest did not care for the grievances of those who dwelt beneath its eaves. Sometimes, traders found their way into these hidden clearings, carts creaking under barrels of salt or bolts of coarse cloth. They bartered charcoal for bread, pitch for iron nails, and sometimes news from the world beyond the green walls. News that the folk listened to with blank faces, as though the doings of kings and earls mattered less than whether the spring floods would rot the lower trunks before the next cutting. Alina, bright-eyed and restless, often lingered near the traders' wagons, tracing the worn maps they carried and asking after the names of towns she would never see. Wulfric would cuff her gently and tell her that the forest was enough, that outside lay only lords and wars and taxes no coin could satisfy. But in the hush of night, as the clamps smoldered under the stars, he sometimes wondered if she might yet slip away someday, follow the rutted cart paths to places where the sun fell full on open fields. Yet for now they remained, bound to the hush and creak of ancient trees, to the reek of smoke and the cut of axe and saw. And though the forest gave them life, it also kept them prisoners in its green dusk, each dawn a struggle for warmth and coin, each night a bargain struck with the shadows that watch from beyond the ring of the fire's glow. For in these deep woods, life was as brittle as the twigs beneath their feet, and just as easily broken if one stepped too far from the worn paths of those who had come before. Far away from the forest's perpetual dusk, beyond the marsh's clinging mists and the highlands' howling winds, lay yet another realm of hardship, one that many might not think the worst at first glance. Yet for countless souls, it was a place where freedom shriveled and hope lay buried beneath stone and iron. This was the prison fortress, a place of cold walls and colder hearts, where men and women languished for crimes large and small, or for no crime at all, but the misfortune of crossing a petty lord or falling foul of a neighbor's envy. The fortress loomed atop a lonely hill, its gray towers veiled in a crown of ravens who feasted well upon scraps and misfortune. No banners brightened its parapets, only weathered stone, damp and mottled with moss, pressing in upon itself as if to squeeze every last breath of warmth from within. Beneath its high walls stretched a yard of churned mud and old straw, where prisoners were herded in the daylight hours to haul stones or break ice from the well when winter's grip turned cruel. Among these lost souls was a man called Osric, once a petty reeve in a distant village, now a prisoner bound in chains for a quarrel with a baron's man that turned bloody by mischance and pride. His hands, once deft with ledgers and the small matters of sheep and tithes, were now raw and cracked from hauling buckets of icy water through endless corridors slick with mildew. His hair grew lank and coarse, and his eyes dulled from nights spent upon straw that stank of damp and despair. The cells within the fortress were holes more than chambers, carved into the stone like wounds that never healed. Light came thin and grudging through arrow slits high above, where frost formed on the inside walls in winter and dripped steadily when spring thawed the mountain snows. Prisoners lay pressed together for warmth, ragged blankets their only bulwark against the biting cold. The smell of stale sweat, unwashed skin, and old rot clung to every corner like a curse. Some had been here so long they forgot their own faces. Others arrived wide-eyed and loud with protest, their voices soon lost in the echo of iron doors slamming shut. Gaolers strode the corridors with keys that jingled like sinister bells, their boots striking sparks from the flagstones. A few were cruel for sport, others simply dead to pity, their eyes as cold as the iron they carried. Osric learned quickly to keep his gaze lowered, his words few, his hands steady on the tasks given, lest he draw the lash or the stocks. Each dawn, a weak broth was ladled out, more water than nourishment, and once a week a crust of bread so hard it might break a tooth. Illness swept through the cells like a shadow, and those who weakened too greatly simply slipped into the dark and were carried out at dawn, wrapped in a winding sheet if they were lucky, a burlap sack if they were not. The fortress had no graveyard of its own. It needed none. The ravine below took the dead, the crows and wolves tending to what lay beyond the walls. Yet even here, whispers bloomed like weeds in a ruined garden. In the darkness, men spoke of escape, of hidden tunnels dug by desperate hands, of bribed gaolers and secret keys. Most were tales spun to warm a soul against the despair that seeped into marrow and dream alike. Some tried nonetheless, slipping a thin bone beneath a lock, bribing a guard with the promise of a buried hoard that never was. More often than not, these ended dangling from the fortress walls as a warning, their shadows stretching long and thin when the dusk sun dipped behind the ramparts. Osric kept his own counsel. He did not dream of tunnels or bribed keys. Instead, he dreamed of his wife's face, lined with worry but gentle with warmth, and of the orchard that bloomed each spring behind their old cottage. He dreamed of the smell of fresh bread, of his daughter's small hand tucked into his own. Such dreams were worth more than false promises whispered in the straw. He spoke of them to no one, lest they be poisoned by the fortress's grim stone. Now and then, the Lord Steward came to the cells, parchment in hand, calling out names of those who would be released, men whose families scraped together coin for fines, or who offered up service in some far-off levy to die beneath a banner not their own. When a name was called, hope flared like a guttering candle. Sometimes it burned steady, and the man went free. Other times, it sputtered and died when no gold arrived, or when the Lord found fresh use for cheap labor. Osric's name was never among them. His wife had no silver to spare. His fields lay fallow, and his orchard untended, and the baron who cursed his name had no wish to see him walk the village lanes again. Yet even within these grim walls, moments of quiet grace flickered like stray embers. A crust of bread pressed into a thin hand by a cellmate who went hungrier for it. A whispered prayer shared between men who scarcely believed in saints anymore. A song hummed in the darkness, a lullaby from someone's mother, carried down the corridor where it curled about the stone and softened its cruel edges for the space of a single breath. And so Osric endured. He rose each dawn to the gaoler's barked command, shouldered his buckets, cleaned the yard, patched the crumbling wall, dragged the waste carts through the snow. When night fell and the fortress settled into uneasy silence, he lay upon his straw, eyes open to the darkness, and listened to the wind slip through the arrow slits, like a ghost, come to remind him that beyond the stone lay a world of orchard blossom and warm hearts, worlds that the fortress could bury, but not quite kill within a man's heart. And perhaps, he thought as sleep claimed him, that small flicker was the cruelest mercy of all, that even in the worst places, some fragile dream of better days lingered, refusing to die, even when hope had long since fled beyond the iron doors.